Hey guys, tonight, let's slowly drift back in time, to an age when the sea ruled everything, and fear often arrived on wooden ships with dragon-shaped heads cutting through the fog. This was the age of the Vikings, warriors whose names alone could empty villages and silence entire coastlines. When their sails appeared on the horizon, bells rang, prayers were whispered, and people ran for their lives. The Vikings were not just raiders, they were storms made of men, hardened by cold winds, shaped by harsh lands, and raised in a culture where death in battle was not feared, but welcomed. To them, war was not chaos, it was destiny, and because of that, most of the world learned to fear them deeply. Kings paid them off. Monasteries hid their treasures. Cities built walls higher and thicker, hoping stone might succeed where soldiers failed. Yet, again and again, the Vikings came ashore, unstoppable, unafraid, almost certain of victory before a sword was ever raised. But history, when you listen closely, tells a quieter story beneath the noise of clashing steel. A story the sagas mention only briefly. A story passed down not with pride, but with caution. Because somewhere along their long journeys, the Vikings met something unfamiliar. Not a great empire, not a powerful king, but a people who did not break. This was a tribe that lived close to the land, not on open plains or shining cities, but in places most armies hated, and dense forests where light barely reached the ground. Marshlands where the earth itself seemed alive, swallowing footsteps and slowing men in heavy armor. Narrow paths known only to those born there. When the Vikings arrived in these lands, expecting fear and easy plunder, they found something else entirely. Silence. No armies waiting, no horns sounding, no warriors charging forward. At first, the Vikings thought it was luck. Empty villages, abandoned paths, easy ground. But as the days passed, strange things began to happen. Supplies went missing. Fires burned low in the night without explanation. Scouts sent ahead simply never returned. There were no bodies, no signs of battle, just absence. The Vikings were used to enemies who faced them head-on, used to the roar of battle, the clash of shields, the moment when fear could be seen in a man's eyes. But here, there was nothing to see, only the feeling of being watched, followed, hunted. Night after night, small attacks came without warning. A lone guard pulled into the darkness. A supply cart destroyed just beyond torchlight. Then silence again. Always silence. The land itself seemed hostile. Heavy armor became a burden. Shields felt clumsy, and every step forward carried uncertainty. The Vikings began to realize that this tribe did not fight for glory. They fought to survive. And they knew something the Vikings did not: patience. In Norse stories, these people were not described as mighty warriors or great heroes. Instead, they were spoken of like shadows, like spirits bound to the earth. Fighters who appeared only when they chose to, and vanished before revenge could be taken. What frightened the Vikings most was not death. They had made peace with that long ago. It was the lack of control, the sense that strength no longer mattered, that bravery meant little when the enemy refused to be seen. Slowly, uneasily, Viking leaders began to change their plans. Raids became shorter. Camps were moved. Certain routes were avoided entirely. And when younger warriors asked why some lands were left untouched, the answers were never clear, only warnings. Because this tribe did not conquer, they did not chase, they waited. And the Vikings, for perhaps the first time in their long, brutal history, learned what it felt like to walk on land where they were no longer the hunters. They were the ones being watched. And as the Vikings slowly realized they were no longer the hunters, a quiet unease began to settle over their camps. It was not the loud fear of battle they knew so well, but something softer, heavier, and far more dangerous. A fear that crept in during the long hours before dawn, when fires burned low and the forest pressed close, breathing softly just beyond the reach of torchlight. These lands did not feel empty anymore. They felt awake. The Vikings began to notice how sound behaved differently here. Footsteps echoed too loudly on damp ground. Armor scraped against branches. Shields knocked together with careless weight. Everything about them felt obvious, exposed, and slow. Meanwhile, the tribe remained unseen, unheard, as if the earth itself had learned how to move. Paths twisted in ways that made no sense to outsiders. Marshes swallowed men whole if they stepped even a little too far from solid ground. Rivers that looked shallow dragged warriors under with sudden strength. The land was not just home to this tribe, it was their weapon. At night, the Vikings spoke less. Laughter faded. Songs were no longer sung. Instead, men sat closer to the fire, staring into the darkness, listening for sounds that never came when expected. The absence itself became frightening. Silence stretched too long. Shadows moved where no one stood. And then, just when tension grew unbearable, something would happen. A scream, a sudden clash, a torch snuffed out in an instant. By the time weapons were raised, there was nothing left to strike. Only broken gear, a trail that vanished into mud, a name spoken once, then never again. The tribe never attacked in numbers large enough to be fought properly. They came in ones and twos, just enough to remind the Vikings they were being studied, measured, tested. Every move the Vikings made taught their enemies more about them, while revealing nothing in return. This was not war as the Norse understood it. There were no decisive moments, no heroic charges, no final stand to sing about later. There was only waiting, an erosion, strength slowly leaking away, not through great losses, but through exhaustion and doubt. Some Vikings began to dream badly. They dreamed of roots grabbing their feet, of eyes watching from beneath water, of hands pulling them down without faces attached. Dreams were important to the Norse. They believed visions carried meaning. And when many men began dreaming the same dreams, whispers spread through the camp. Perhaps this land was cursed. Perhaps the spirits did not welcome them. Perhaps the gods themselves had turned their gaze away. The tribe did nothing to correct these beliefs. In fact, they quietly encouraged them. They left signs behind, strange markings carved into trees, objects placed where they would be found just before dawn. Sometimes the remains of animals, arranged in ways that unsettled even hardened warriors. Not to threaten openly, but to disturb the mind. To make the Vikings question what was real and what was imagined. The Norse were brave, but they were also deeply superstitious. They believed the world was filled with unseen forces, with spirits that lived in land, water, and forest. And here, surrounded by places they did not understand, those beliefs became heavy. Leadership grew strained. Commanders argued over routes and timing. Some wanted to strike deeper, to force a battle and end the tension. Others urged a retreat, insisting that no treasure was worth this slow bleeding of men and morale. Younger warriors wanted glory, older ones wanted survival, and the tribe waited. They knew the seasons. They knew when the rains would come, turning ground into traps. They knew when rivers would swell. They knew when hunger would begin to bite. Time was on their side, and they treated it like a loyal ally. Weeks passed, and the Vikings began to lose what mattered most to them: confidence. They were still strong, still armed, still capable of violence, but strength alone meant nothing here. Every advance felt like a mistake waiting to happen. Every camp felt temporary. Every decision carried doubt. At last, something rare occurred. The Vikings chose to leave, not in panic, not in defeat, but in quiet acceptance that this land did not want them, that this enemy could not be forced into the kind of battle they needed to win. And so ships were loaded, camps dismantled, fires extinguished carefully, as if even flame might anger the watching forest. As they withdrew, the tribe did not pursue. They did not celebrate openly. They simply remained invisible, patient, victorious without ever standing on a battlefield. Back in safer waters, the story spread in fragments. Viking leaders spoke carefully, choosing words that did not sound like fear. But warnings slipped through. Certain lands were mentioned less. Certain routes were marked as unprofitable. Younger warriors were told there was nothing worth taking there. Over time, the tribe became something else in Viking memory. Not just enemies, but a lesson. Proof that not all power could be broken by axes and courage. That some people survived, not by being stronger, but by being wiser. Their name faded. Their faces were never carved into stone. No great saga was sung entirely in their honor. And yet, their influence remained, hidden between the lines of Norse history. They were the ones who taught the Vikings restraint, who taught them caution, who showed them that fear did not always belong to the weak. And long after the ships had sailed away, the forests returned to silence. Marshes closed over old footprints. Rivers flowed as they always had. The land swallowed the evidence of what happened, keeping the secret safe. Because this tribe had never needed to be remembered. They only needed to endure. Time passed, and with it, the sharp edges of memory began to soften. For the Vikings, distance had a way of turning fear into story, and story into something easier to live with. Yet even as years went by, there were places marked in the minds of sailors that no map ever fully explained. Stretches of coasts avoided without reason given. Rivers sailed past without stopping. Forested shores glanced at, then left behind in silence. These were not decisions made lightly. Among the Norse, experience was valued above bravado. A man who survived many voyages was listened to, even when his warnings came wrapped in uneasy pauses rather than bold declarations. And when such men spoke of lands where strength had failed them, younger warriors learned to pay attention. What made this tribe different was not their numbers. They were not vast. They did not command armies that darkened the horizon. What they possessed instead was an understanding that ran deeper than muscle or steel. They knew the rhythms of their world intimately. The sound the ground made when stepped on at night. The way mist moved before rain. The subtle signs that told them someone unfamiliar had entered their territory. They also understood the minds of those who came for them. The Vikings arrived expecting fear, resistance, or submission. They expected reactions, but this tribe offered none of those things in predictable ways. By refusing to behave like an enemy should, they removed the Vikings' greatest advantage: certainty. Uncertainty erodes confidence slowly, like water wearing away stone. Within the tribe, life continued much as it always had. Families moved quietly through familiar paths. Fires were kept small. Children were taught early how to listen rather than speak, how to watch without being seen. Survival was not a concept discussed openly. It was woven into daily movement, into habits so old they felt instinctive. There were no grand speeches before attacks, no rituals meant to impress outsiders. Every action served a purpose. Every risk was weighed carefully. Violence was used sparingly, precisely, and only when it shifted the balance back in their favor. This was not hatred driving them. It was protection. They understood that defeating the Vikings outright was unnecessary. All they needed was to convince them that staying was a mistake. And once that lesson was learned, the land itself would finish the work. Seasons turned, and as winters came and went, the Vikings carried these lessons with them. Other raids followed. Other enemies were faced. Yet now and then, when planning journeys, an older voice would speak up, reminding the others that not all shores were equal, that some places demanded respect rather than conquest, and respect, among Vikings, was not easily earned. Over generations, the tribe's presence became less physical and more symbolic. They were spoken of like a force of nature rather than people, a warning embodied in story, a reminder that even the boldest could be humbled without ever losing a battle. Ironically, this worked in the tribe's favor. As their name blurred and their image faded, their safety increased. This theory protected them better than walls ever could. The less the outside world understood them, the less it tried to reach them. Eventually, history moved on, as it always does. Kingdoms rose, borders shifted, new powers replaced old ones. The age of the Vikings slowly declined, not with a single ending, but with a quiet fading into legend. And through it all, the tribe remained. They did not leave monuments behind. They did not carve their victories into stone. Their legacy lived in absence. In the battles that never happened. In the raids that were quietly cancelled. In the ships that sailed past without stopping. To modern eyes, this kind of victory is easy to overlook. History favors loud moments, crowns, crowds, conquests. But survival, when achieved against overwhelming force, is one of the rarest triumphs of all. The land remembers even when people forget. Paths, once used by warriors, returned to animal trails. Old campsites sank back into earth. Water erased footprints. Trees grew where men once stood watch. And the tribe adapted, generation after generation, as they always had. They were never trying to become legend. They were simply refusing to disappear. And in doing so, they left behind a quiet truth, still relevant long after swords have rusted and ships have turned to dust. That fear does not always belong to those without power. Sometimes, fear belongs to those who believe power alone is enough. Because somewhere in the deep folds of history, there were people who understood this better than anyone else. And they survived. The survival of the tribe was never dramatic, never announced with victory cries or songs carried on the wind. It unfolded quietly, almost invisibly, the way roots spread beneath the soil long before a forest appears above ground. And as the outside world continued to change, the tribe adapted without ever needing to declare who they were or what they had endured. For generations, their knowledge was passed down not through written words, but through movement, caution, and memory. Children learned early which paths were safe and which were not. They learned how to read the land the way others read maps. A broken reed meant someone had passed recently. A disturbed patch of mud told a story of weight, speed, and direction. Even the birds mattered. When they fell silent at the wrong moment, it was a warning. To outsiders, these skills might have seemed primitive. To the tribe, they were survival itself. Long after the Vikings had reduced these lands to whispered warnings, other people came. Traders, settlers, explorers, chasing opportunity rather than conquest. Some arrived with curiosity instead of violence, and those were treated differently. The tribe understood the difference between those who wished to take and those who wished to pass through. Still, caution remained their greatest strength. They revealed little. They trusted slowly. When the balance felt wrong, they faded back into the land, allowing forests and marshes to speak for them once again. This ability to appear and disappear, to engage and withdraw, kept them safe long after their enemies had forgotten them. History, written by those who build and conquer, struggled to capture people like this. Records focused on borders and rulers, not on those who avoided being ruled at all. And so the tribe slipped through the cracks of documented time, existing more as influence than as entry. Yet traces remained. In later stories told by travelers, there were mentions of regions where guides refused to linger, places where paths felt older than memory, areas where settlements never truly took root, despite fertile land. Scholars debated reasons: climate, disease, bad luck. Few considered the simplest explanation. Someone was still there, watching, protecting. Even as centuries passed, the core lesson endured. Power does not always belong to the loudest or the strongest. Sometimes it belongs to those who understand when to strike and when to remain unseen. To those who accept that survival is not weakness and avoidance is not cowardice. The Vikings, for all their ferocity, learned this lesson the hard way. They encountered an enemy who did not seek glory, did not crave recognition, and did not fear them enough to behave predictably. And that, more than any weapon, unsettled them. In the end, the tribe never needed to defeat the Vikings outright. Time did that on its own. Ships rotted, swords rusted, stories blurred. What remained was land, unchanged and patient, holding the memory of those who had learned to live within it rather than above it. This is why their story matters, even now. Because history often teaches us to admire conquerors, but rarely pauses to honor those who quietly refuse to be conquered. Those who survived not by domination, but by understanding, not by expansion, but by restraint. The tribe left no monuments behind, but they left something far more enduring. Proof that strength can be subtle, that fear can flow both ways, and that sometimes the greatest victory is simply continuing to exist, unnoticed and unbroken, while empires rise and fall around you. And somewhere, deep in the landscapes that once swallowed Viking footsteps, the land still remembers the people who taught one of history's fiercest warriors that not every battle could be won. They were never meant to be famous. They were never meant to be feared by the world, only by those who came to take what was never theirs. The memory of what happened lingered in subtle ways, not as clear stories passed from mouth to mouth, but as instincts that shaped behavior long after the reasons had faded. People who lived near those old lands grew up hearing that certain forests felt heavier than others, that some wetlands demanded silence, that there were places where it was better to move carefully, even when no danger seemed visible. These were not rules written down. They were feelings inherited. As generations passed, the tribe itself slowly changed, as all living things do. Faces shifted, names evolved, customs adapted to new pressures and new neighbors. Yet the core of who they were remained intact, held together by a shared understanding of one simple truth: survival depended on knowing when to be present and when to disappear. They became masters of balance. When times were calm, they traded quietly, exchanging goods without revealing the full extent of their settlements. When threats returned, they withdrew again, leaving behind nothing but silence and uncertainty. To outsiders, this behavior seemed contradictory, but to the tribe, it was consistency, a rhythm learned over centuries of listening to the land. Long after the last Viking longship had sailed away for good, the world entered new ages. Steel improved, maps became more accurate, written records expanded, kingdoms demanded borders, taxes, and allegiance. These changes pressed in from all sides, threatening people who lived beyond easy control. And yet, even then, the tribe endured, not by resisting openly, but by adapting quietly. Some blended into nearby populations. Others moved deeper into places still difficult to reach. Knowledge fragmented, shared only with those who proved they understood its weight. What once had been a single people became a network of memory, scattered but connected by shared habits and unspoken rules. This made them harder to erase, not easier. Historians searching for clear answers grew frustrated. Archaeological traces were thin. Settlements appeared briefly, then vanished. Tools suggested activity, but not permanence. It was as if the people responsible had learned how to exist without leaving footprints behind. In a way, they had. What the Vikings encountered was not just a tribe, but a philosophy of survival, one built on patience, observation, and restraint. A way of life that rejected the idea that power must always announce itself. That sometimes, the strongest position is the one no one notices. This is why their story feels unfinished. There is no dramatic ending, no final battle, no moment where everything changes at once. Instead, the story dissolves into the present, woven into the fabric of the land and the people who still move through it. Perhaps that is the point. The Vikings wanted stories that would last forever, sung by poets and remembered by kings. They wanted to be seen, to be known. And for a time, they achieved that. But the tribe wanted something else entirely. They wanted to remain. And in the quiet contest between fame and survival, it was the unseen who ultimately won. Even now, when people walk through old forests or cross forgotten wetlands, there are moments when the air feels different, when sound seems muted, when the world feels watchful rather than empty. Most dismiss it as imagination, or the weight of history pressing gently against the present. But sometimes, those feelings are echoes of people who understood that fear could be turned into a shield, that knowledge could outweigh strength, and that disappearing, when done wisely, could be the greatest act of resistance of all. They were never written into history books with certainty. They were never crowned, or conquered, or erased. They simply continued, and in doing so, they left behind one of history's quietest lessons, that even the most feared warriors in the world once met an enemy they could not defeat, not because they were weaker, but because they were wiser. The land remembers them, the silence remembers them, and perhaps that is exactly how they wanted it to be. The quiet wisdom of that survival did not fade with time. It settled deeper, becoming almost invisible, like a current beneath still water. What remained of the tribe was no longer defined by clear boundaries or a single shared name, but by a way of thinking that moved effortlessly from one generation to the next. They understood that being noticed was dangerous, and being misunderstood was often safer than being fully known. As centuries unfolded, outsiders continued to pass through nearby regions, bringing new languages, new beliefs, new ambitions. Roads were cut where forests once ruled. Villages rose and fell. Empires claimed land with ink and seals, convinced that drawing lines on parchment meant control. But paper never fully captured the truth of these places. The land still resisted in small, quiet ways. Floods returned when they were least expected. Paths eroded. Crops failed in areas that should have thrived. Travelers spoke of routes that felt wrong, of ground that seemed to shift beneath their feet. To officials and scholars, these were inconveniences, mysteries to be solved. To those who still carried fragments of the tribe's knowledge, they were reminders. Nothing here could be owned easily. What the Vikings once encountered had not been an accident of history. It was the result of a worldview shaped by patience, a belief that the land was not something to dominate, but something to cooperate with. While conquerors tried to bend nature to their will, the tribe learned to bend themselves, adjusting quietly, always staying just beyond reach. This adaptability protected them far longer than weapons ever could. Over time, stories emerged that felt oddly familiar. Tales of raiders who entered certain regions and returned empty-handed, of armies slowed and weakened without ever facing a decisive battle, of explorers who described an uneasy feeling of being guided away from places they could not explain. These accounts were scattered, unconnected, often dismissed, but taken together, they formed a pattern. The tribe's greatest strength had never been invisibility alone. It was understanding how others thought. They knew that fear grew fastest in uncertainty, that frustration turned quickly into retreat, and that most aggressors, when denied clear victories, would simply look elsewhere for easier gains. The Vikings had learned this lesson first, but they were far from the last. As the modern world began to take shape, the echoes grew fainter, but they never fully vanished. Some customs survived in unexpected forms: a preference for indirect paths, a habit of watching before acting, a respect for silence that felt almost sacred. These were not things taught openly. They were absorbed, the way children absorb the moods of a place before they ever understand its history. To historians, the tribe remains elusive. The evidence refuses to line up neatly. Dates blur, names shift. Artifacts raise more questions than they answer. Yet absence itself can be a kind of proof. Entire regions where domination failed, where power slipped and slid, where control was claimed but never truly held. In those gaps, their legacy breathes. The Vikings, for all their ferocity, were remembered because they sought remembrance. Their ships, their sagas, their symbols, were designed to endure. The tribe chose the opposite path, and paradoxically, that choice allowed them to outlast forces far greater than themselves. They understood something many never do, that history does not only belong to those who leave marks, it also belongs to those who avoid them. And so, the story continues quietly, not as a tale of conquest, but as a reminder that there are many ways to resist, many ways to survive, and that sometimes the most powerful act is simply refusing to play by the rules of those who come to take. Even as the centuries passed, the presence of the tribe remained a subtle force, woven into the fabric of forests, marshes, and hidden valleys. Outsiders came and went, some driven by curiosity, some by ambition, yet most left unsettled, sensing a rhythm in the land that refused to bend to their will. The tribe's influence was not overt. It did not rely on battles or monuments. Instead, it existed in the patterns of survival, in the patience of observation, in the instinct to wait rather than confront. They had learned that history favored the loudest voices, but survival favored the quietest. While kingdoms rose and fell, and armies marched with pride, the tribe continued moving lightly through the land, unseen yet profoundly effective. They were masters of timing, knowing when to act and when to let events pass naturally, allowing the weight of others' mistakes to work in their favor. This understanding extended beyond mere survival. It was philosophy. They knew the difference between conflict that mattered and conflict that wasted energy. They understood that, sometimes, letting the enemy advance only strengthened their own position, and that avoidance could be more potent than attack. By the time the Vikings' long shadow had faded from these lands, the tribe's presence had become almost entirely a whisper in the wind. Few remembered their name, and even fewer could trace the stories accurately. But those who encountered them or sensed them carried a mark of caution in their bones, a quiet respect for a force they could not see, could not fight, and could not understand. Trade routes shifted. Settlements rose in distant valleys, yet attempts to establish permanent dominion over certain areas failed. Crops failed in fertile soil. Horses sank into marshy tracks that appeared solid. Travelers lost their way. Generations of outsiders could not explain why some regions were inhospitable, despite seeming ideal. The tribe had mastered a subtle form of control, influence through environment, knowledge, and timing rather than through armies or weapons. Over generations, their understanding of human nature became as sharp as their knowledge of the land. They observed patterns of fear, pride, and impatience. They knew when to allow curiosity to draw someone close, when to retreat, and when a single act could permanently shape perception. And by doing so, they made themselves nearly invisible, yet impossible to forget. Those who survived encounters with these lands carried stories of unease, of strange intuition, of silent warnings that could not be explained. Traders mentioned that certain forests made them feel watched, even when no one was there. Explorers noted marshes that seemed to shift beneath their feet, steering them away from areas they believed they could traverse. Such stories were scattered, often dismissed, but they formed a paternal testament to a people who had mastered patience, observation, and strategic invisibility long before the concept existed in books. And so, the tribe endured not as a force of aggression, but as a force of understanding. They never needed to conquer, for they had learned that survival itself could outlast conquest. They never needed to boast, for their victories were measured in time, in the continued presence of a people who refused to be erased. Even as the outside world modernized, with borders, armies, and written records claiming permanence, the tribe persisted. Their methods remained the same, moving lightly, observing carefully, intervening only when necessary, and always respecting the rhythms of the land that had sheltered them for centuries. The lessons of their survival are subtle, almost invisible, but no less powerful. They teach that not all strength comes from force, that wisdom often outlasts swordsmanship, that enduring requires patience, observation, and the courage to vanish when the moment is wrong. Even now, centuries later, traces of their philosophy can be sensed in the landscape. Silent forests, hidden marshes, and winding paths hold echoes of their knowledge. Those who travel these regions carefully, listening and watching, can feel the same sense of measured caution that shaped the lives of countless generations before them. They were never remembered in the way conquerors are. They were never celebrated in song or tale, but their impact remains, etched not in stone, but in survival, in subtle influence, in lessons that ripple quietly through time. And in understanding this, one realizes that history is not only written by those who dominate and destroy, but also by those who endure, adapt, and master the art of existing on their own terms. The survival of this tribe through centuries was not a matter of chance. It was deliberate, guided by knowledge passed down with care and repetition. Each generation learned the subtle rhythms of the land as naturally as breathing. Children were taught not with maps or rules, but with observation. They watched the behavior of animals, the movement of water, and the shifting patterns of seasons. They learned which plants could hide footsteps, which birds warned of intruders, and how to navigate marshes and forests with the skill of someone born as much from the land as into it. Their understanding extended beyond nature. They studied humans as carefully as they studied the environment. They noticed the impatience of those who sought quick victories. They watched for arrogance and pride, knowing these traits could be as dangerous to outsiders as swords or fire. From this knowledge, the tribe learned to act with precision, to intervene only when necessary, to remain invisible when the consequences of exposure outweighed any advantage. By the time empires and organized states began expanding their reach into Europe, this tribe had long since mastered invisibility as a tool of survival. They understood the value of patience over confrontation, observation over force, and timing over recklessness. Their victories were measured not in conquest, but in continued existence. While others sought glory through battle, they claimed it through even as technology advanced around them, stronger weapons, faster ships, written laws, their approach remained constant. They adapted quietly, moving as needed, retreating when necessary, always calculating the cost of exposure. Outsiders arrived, unaware that these lands were not empty, believing they were untouched by the human hand. And yet, the tribe's influence was everywhere. Small obstacles, subtle signs, and strategic silence shaped the behavior of those who ventured too close. Traders left wary. Soldiers retreated without apparent cause. Explorers spoke of roads that seemed impossible, rivers that shifted unexpectedly, and forests that resisted passage. This mastery of subtle control ensured not only survival, but respect of a kind that could not be demanded or forced. The tribe did not fight for recognition, they fought to live. And in that fight, they became almost mythical, not because of their actions alone, but because of their continued presence. To be unseen, yet effective, to act without leaving traces, to control outcomes without open confrontation, these were their forms of power. Over centuries, knowledge became codified in practice rather than in writing. Children observed, adults enforced rules through example. Elder members conveyed wisdom through careful instruction and demonstration. Every skill, every tactic, every behavior was honed over generations. Their survival was no accident. It was culture in motion, a continuous, living adaptation to the demands of a world filled with outsiders who measured power differently than they did. And yet, this was not a people without emotion or connection. They lived in families, built communities, and formed bonds that tied them to the land and to each other. Every decision was rooted in the understanding that the group mattered more than the individual. Survival required coordination, trust, and unspoken understanding. The land, in turn, rewarded them with safety and sustenance. Streams offered clean water, forests provided concealment, and marshlands deterred the unwelcome. It was a partnership between people and place, one that outsiders could never fully comprehend. As history moved forward, many outsiders tried to claim these lands. Kings, soldiers, merchants, and settlers attempted to control the forests, the marshes, and the hidden valleys. But the tribe had long since mastered avoidance and subtle influence. They allowed access only when it served them, drawing outsiders away from critical areas through indirect routes, misleading signs, and the quiet manipulation of perception. To the untrained eye, these regions appeared difficult, inhospitable, or unlucky, but these were not accidents. They were careful measures designed to protect the tribe without confrontation. Even the legends that grew around these areas reflect the tribe's philosophy. Stories of cursed forests, haunted wetlands, or lands that swallowed travelers were passed down in hushed tones. Some historians dismiss these tales as superstition or exaggeration, but in truth, they were reflections of the tribe's method of survival. Fear was a tool, and caution was cultivated. Outsiders who heeded the warnings rarely realized the wisdom in them, but those who ignored them often returned empty-handed or not at all. The tribe's methods also ensured that history would not record them in the ways conventional histories favor. They left no monuments, no grand victories on the battlefield, no inscriptions to immortalize their deeds. Instead, their legacy was embedded in patterns, in the subtle shaping of environment and perception, in the endurance of a people who could outlast empires through patience and careful observation. Where others sought fame, they sought life. Where others sought to dominate, they sought harmony with the land that protected them. As centuries continued, external pressures intensified, empires expanded, borders were drawn, taxes collected, armies marched, laws were written and enforced. Each of these changes brought potential threats, yet the tribe adapted continuously. Knowledge that had once guided them through Viking incursions now guided them through entirely different challenges. The principles were the same: patience, awareness, subtlety, and the avoidance of unnecessary confrontation. These principles ensured survival in the face of evolving threats. Moreover, their understanding of human behavior remained central. They observed power and ambition, noting that those who demanded recognition often fell prey to impatience, pride, or recklessness. They learned to exploit these tendencies not with direct attack, but with delay, disappearance, and subtle manipulation of perception. By appearing and vanishing at the right moments, they preserved autonomy while shaping the movements of outsiders around them. Even as written records proliferated, the tribe remained largely invisible in official histories. Mentions of strange occurrences in forests, inexplicable failures of settlements, and regions avoided by explorers hint at their continued presence. But these records never connected clearly to the people themselves. To the historians and chroniclers, they were anomalies. To the tribe, they were everyday life. And so, the centuries unfolded with the tribe maintaining continuity, always adapting, always surviving. They did not seek glory. They did not seek dominance. They sought existence, and in that pursuit, they became masters of time itself. By avoiding battles they could not control, choosing action over reaction, and learning from each encounter with outsiders, they ensured that their people, their knowledge, and their way of life endured far longer than those who pursued fame or conquest. This approach created a quiet form of influence. Outsiders were often guided, whether intentionally or through instinctive understanding of the land's rhythms, away from critical regions. Traders avoided certain forests. Explorers failed to establish lasting settlements in places that seemed ideal. Armies withdrew, frustrated by the inefficiency of their campaigns, and through it all, the tribe remained largely invisible, yet profoundly present. The pattern continued for generations, each reinforcing the same philosophy. Visibility was dangerous. Patience was strength. Understanding the land and human nature was more powerful than any weapon. Conflict was to be avoided when unnecessary, but when required, it was precise and purposeful. And as history continued to move forward, this quiet mastery of survival and adaptation became the tribe's most enduring legacy. They proved that power does not always belong to those who dominate openly, that endurance can be far more formidable than aggression, and that invisibility, when used wisely, can be an instrument of survival more potent than any sword. Over time, the tribe's relationship with the land became almost sacred. Every hill, every river, every dense forest carried meaning that outsiders could never perceive. Children learned not only how to survive, but how to interpret subtle signals in the environment. A bird's song could indicate movement. A shift in the wind could signal danger. A ripple across a marsh could reveal the path of a traveler days before anyone arrived. These lessons were embedded in daily life, so natural that no one thought of them as extraordinary. They were simply how the world worked. The tribe's culture was built on observation and patience. There were no great public celebrations, no ostentatious displays of strength. Achievements were measured in quiet endurance, in successfully teaching the next generation to live safely, wisely, and invisibly. Elders passed down knowledge through demonstration, stories, and practice. Words mattered, but so did silence. Learning was as much about watching as it was about doing. Mistakes were opportunities to understand the limits of the land and the behavior of those who might one day encroach. Interaction with outsiders was cautious, deliberate. They did not seek confrontation, yet neither did they flee blindly. They assessed intentions, patterns, and risks. Traders who came to exchange goods were often met at the edges of settlements, shown just enough to complete a transaction and nothing more. Armies or marauders, on the other hand, were guided subtly into dead ends, bogs, or paths that seemed promising but led nowhere. No overt force was necessary. Perception and strategy were sufficient. As the centuries passed, outsiders left more written records, yet they rarely captured the reality of what existed in these lands. Chroniclers spoke of cursed forests, regions inhospitable to travel, and rivers that seemed to resist crossing. Settlements failed inexplicably, crops did not grow as expected, and armies abandoned campaigns without apparent cause. To the tribe, these were not failures of fortune, they were carefully maintained the consequences of observation, subtle intervention, and the natural difficulty of the terrain. To outsiders, they were anomalies. The tribe also developed social structures that reinforced survival. Leadership was less about rank or dominance, and more about wisdom, judgment, and understanding of the land. Decisions were made collectively, often in quiet consultation, rather than through declarations of authority. This allowed flexibility. Rules could shift based on circumstance, but principles, patience, observation, subtlety, and survival remained unchanged. Everyone had a role, everyone knew the rhythm of their world, and everyone understood that exposure was dangerous. Even spiritual beliefs were shaped by survival. Rituals and practices emphasized connection with the land, understanding its moods, and recognizing patterns in both nature and human behavior. While outsiders might have interpreted these practices as superstition, they were practical tools designed to reinforce vigilance, awareness, and the ability to act without being noticed. Over generations, these practices became second nature. The tribe moved with an unspoken confidence, as if the world itself whispered guidance to them. Conflict, when unavoidable, was precise and efficient. The tribe did not engage in prolonged battles or open warfare. Strikes were targeted, sudden, and calculated. Supply lines were disrupted. Leaders were misled. But the objective was never destruction for glory, it was preservation. The tribe understood that unnecessary aggression could expose them to counterattack. Their power lay in remaining enigmatic, in shaping perception rather than dominating through force. And yet, despite centuries of careful survival, the tribe left traces, small, deliberate signs that hinted at their presence without revealing too much. An overturned branch might mark a path. A carefully placed object could mislead travelers. Small patterns in the forest could create the illusion of movement where there was none. Outsiders often interpreted these signs as coincidence, superstition, or the work of spirits. In truth, they were intentional, calculated methods to control outcomes without ever engaging directly. Time itself became an ally. The tribe understood that rushing could be fatal. They measured risk not in moments but across days, weeks, and even seasons. By allowing outsiders to move too quickly, they could turn impatience into vulnerability. By retreating at just the right moment, they preserved strength and avoided unnecessary exposure. Patience, understanding, and timing were as vital as any weapon. Even as the world around them changed, empires rising and falling, technology advancing, borders redrawn to tribe maintained continuity. Their identity was not in conquest, fame, or wealth. It was in survival, knowledge, and subtle influence. Each generation inherited more than territory or material possessions. They inherited a philosophy. Every choice, every observation, every cautious movement was part of a continuous strategy designed to ensure the survival of the people as a whole. Through these centuries, outsiders continued to report unexplained events. Traders recounted getting lost in forests that seemed straightforward. Soldiers described rivers that shifted unexpectedly, slowing movement or making certain regions impassable. Explorers left notes of discomfort, unease, and a sense that they were being subtly guided or deterred. These occurrences were rarely connected, dismissed as coincidence, superstition, or bad luck. But collectively, they represented the enduring influence of a people who never needed to dominate openly to control outcomes. The tribe's philosophy extended beyond survival into subtle social influence. They understood human behavior deeply, how fear spreads, how impatience leads to mistakes, and how pride can blind even the strong. They did not need to strike physically to shape outcomes. Instead, they used their knowledge of human tendencies, combined with control over terrain and perception, to manipulate the flow of events without exposing themselves to unnecessary danger. Even when distant powers attempted to claim their lands through conquest, taxation, or colonization, the tribe adapted quietly. They merged when necessary, retreated when threatened, and leveraged every advantage offered by the terrain and human psychology. They understood that survival often required compromise, and that visibility could be a liability. By remaining partly hidden, they preserved autonomy while influencing outcomes indirectly. Their impact was subtle, yet profound. Outsiders often left the lands of the tribe without fully understanding why certain plans had failed. Settlements were abandoned, campaigns halted, roads avoided. They left no monuments, no inscriptions, no grand stories to sing in halls. Yet, the patterns of their existence shaped the movements of generations of outsiders, the rise and fall of settlements, and even the course of local economies. Through centuries, the tribe became almost a legend without a name. Their stories were passed down obliquely through warnings and local law. Forests, rivers, and marshes became synonymous with caution and subtle danger. Knowledge of their methods persisted in instinctual behaviors, in patterns of observation, and in the unspoken recognition that these lands required respect. And even as the written record grew elsewhere, the tribe remained largely invisible. Historians overlooked them, archaeologists found hints but no definitive answers, and chroniclers rarely linked the phenomena they observed to a living people. Yet the tribe endured, guided by principles that transcended time, patience, observation, subtlety, and the quiet exercise of influence. By surviving silently, they proved a profound lesson to those who sought power. Dominance is not the only path to strength. Endurance, understanding, and careful strategy can achieve results that force, fame, or weaponry cannot. In avoiding battles they could not control, shaping outcomes without confrontation, and adapting continuously to changing circumstances, the tribe mastered survival in a way that few conquerors ever could. And even now, long after their earliest encounters with the Vikings, echoes of their philosophy persist. Travelers moving carefully through forests, marshes, and valleys may sense a subtle rhythm, a quiet order that guides movement, warns of danger, and rewards observation. It is not superstition, nor coincidence. It is the enduring imprint of a people who mastered survival, not through force, but through patience, intelligence, and harmony with the land. The tribe's connection with the land was more than survival. It was life itself. Every action, from planting to hunting to moving through forests, was measured and deliberate. Nothing was wasted, and nothing was left to chance. Children grew up learning these rhythms instinctively, guided by observation, by imitation, and by quiet instruction from elders who had spent decades attuned to subtle patterns in nature. They learned which paths allowed silent movement, which areas were safest at dawn or dusk, and which places could conceal them entirely from prying eyes. Their understanding of humans was equally refined. Outsiders were studied with the same care as the natural environment. Every movement, every gesture, every pause offered clues about intention, strength, and fear. They learned to recognize hesitation, impatience, and arrogance, and they knew precisely when and how to exploit these traits. The tribe acted only when it mattered, never revealing the full extent of its knowledge, and always preserving the balance between exposure and invisibility. Rituals within the tribe reflected these principles. Daily practices emphasized awareness, patience, and respect for the land. Morning walks taught observation of subtle changes in the environment, a bent branch signaling recent passage, disturbed mud showing weight and direction, the flight patterns of birds signaling hidden movement. Evening gatherings reinforced the importance of listening, of interpreting sounds and smells, of understanding the world beyond immediate perception. These rituals were practical, yet they carried a deeper cultural significance. Survival was not merely physical, but mental and spiritual. Seasonal changes shaped their lives profoundly. Winters demanded caution. Marshes froze unpredictably, rivers shifted, and the forest's concealment was both a blessing and a trap. Spring brought new growth, allowing for concealed movement and replenishment of supplies. Each season was a teacher, providing lessons in timing, patience, and adaptation. The tribe's calendar was not measured by months or years alone, but by the subtle shifts in the environment, each change dictating appropriate behavior and movement. Social structure reinforced these principles. Leadership was determined not by brute strength, but by wisdom and skill in reading both the land and people. Elders guided decisions, ensuring actions served the collective well-being. Roles were assigned based on aptitude, observation, and reliability rather than hierarchy alone. The tribe valued cohesion and subtlety over individual glory. Success was measured not by conquest, but by continued survival and harmonious living with both environment and community. When outsiders ventured near, the tribe's methods of protection were subtle and precise. They rarely confronted directly. Instead, they shaped perception. A trail left slightly askew could mislead travelers. The sound of water over stones could mask footsteps or indicate false direction. Fires lit at intervals created the illusion of habitation or activity, where none existed. These methods required patience and foresight, but they minimized risk and maintained secrecy. Conflict, when unavoidable, was handled with similar precision. Unlike outsiders who sought glory through battle, the tribe's goal was always preservation. Strikes were calculated, minimal, and effective. Supply lines were disrupted. Leaders were misled. Yet every action was measured to avoid exposing the tribe unnecessarily. They understood that victory in the visible sense was less important than survival in the long term. The tribe also maintained cultural knowledge that reinforced group cohesion and identity. Stories were passed down not as entertainment, but as lessons in observation, patience, and subtle influence. Myths about spirits, enchanted rivers, and sentient forests were practical tools as much as narrative. Children internalized these stories, learning to respect the land, to fear carelessness, and to understand that visibility was risk. The stories trained their minds long before danger arrived physically. Over generations, their adaptability ensured continuity. External threats tempered as armies, settlers never erased their presence. The tribe moved when necessary, observed carefully, and intervened selectively. Their knowledge of terrain and human behavior made them elusive. Outsiders often misinterpreted these failures as misfortune or superstition. Unaware of the careful planning that protected the tribe's endurance created an almost mythic quality. They became a symbol of subtle strength, of survival without confrontation. Outsiders who ventured into their lands carried stories of uneasy forests, shifting marshes, and paths that seemed to mislead even the most experienced travelers. These accounts, often dismissed, collectively illustrate a persistent influence that defied conventional understanding of power. Even as modern maps and technology developed, traces of the tribe's presence persisted. Certain regions remained difficult to traverse, crops failed unexpectedly, and rivers shifted unpredictably. These anomalies were recorded by historians, yet rarely explained fully. The pattern of their influence endured in landscape, habit, and instinct, a quiet testament to their understanding of both environment and human nature. The tribe's philosophy was simple, yet profound. Strength was not measured in conquest, but in survival. Control was exercised subtly, through environment, knowledge, and patience, rather than direct force. Conflict was avoided unless necessary, and influence was achieved through observation and timing. These principles allowed them to endure through centuries of change, from Viking raids to empires and beyond. Their rituals reinforced these values continually. Practices of observation, movement, and listening became second nature. Every action was purposeful, every decision measured. This constant attentiveness ensured that even in moments of apparent inactivity, the tribe was fully engaged with the world, shaping outcomes without exposure. Generations inherited this philosophy, creating a continuous chain of survival knowledge. Children became adept at reading signs in the environment and interpreting human behavior instinctively. Elders provided guidance, but often through demonstration rather than explicit instruction. Lessons were absorbed, not memorized. Understanding came from experience, from immersion, and from living in harmony with the rhythms of the land. Even today, echoes of their influence can be felt. Hidden trails, shifting wetlands, forests that seem alive with observational, bear traces of the tribe's enduring philosophy. Travelers moving cautiously through these regions sense a rhythm, a silent intelligence guiding movement. This is not imagination. It is the residue of centuries of careful survival, a philosophy preserved in patterns of perception, movement, and respect for the unseen. The tribe's legacy is not written in stone, nor sung in halls. It survives in patience, observation, subtle influence, and endurance. They teach a lesson that even the most feared warriors once learned, that power is not always about dominance, that survival often requires subtlety, and that invisibility, when exercised with understanding, can be more powerful than force. Through these centuries, their influence shaped not only the land, but the behavior of outsiders. Traders, explorers, and soldiers learned caution where it was needed most, often without realizing why. Their failures and retreats preserved the tribe's autonomy and reinforced the lessons embedded in the landscape itself. The tribe endured because they understood the art of living within limits. They measured risks, they observed patiently, they acted only when necessary. And through all of this, they remained invisible yet profoundly effective, demonstrating that survival, influence, and wisdom can persist far longer than conquest or fame. The daily life of the tribe was quiet, almost imperceptible to anyone who might pass nearby. Every movement, every sound, every small interaction was deliberate. Children rose with the light, learning to move softly through undergrowth, to observe, without being seen, and to interpret the slightest hints in the environment. They practiced reading the signs that most outsiders would overlook. A shift in the color of moss, the faint indentation of footsteps days old, the direction of wind carrying scents and sounds in unexpected ways. Adults moved with the same care, balancing work and vigilance. Hunting, for example, was never a reckless pursuit of prey. It was a study of the rhythms of the forest, the behavior of animals, and the patterns of other humans who might enter the area. Even gathering wood or food was performed with an awareness of visibility, of leaving minimal traces, and of preserving the natural balance. They understood that carelessness could expose the tribe to dangers invisible to an untrained eye. Daily survival also required mastery of subtle tactics. The tribe's members learned how to disguise tracks, how to mislead observers, and how to manipulate perception without confrontation. Streams could be redirected slightly to hide movement. Paths could be obscured or marked in ways that created false impressions. Fires were lit at calculated intervals to suggest habitation where there was none, guiding outsiders away from critical areas. Every action was deliberate, yet it appeared natural. Outsiders interpreted these phenomena as chance, superstition, or the unpredictability of the land, never realizing the intelligence behind them. Within the tribe, knowledge was shared carefully. Elders instructed the young not only in practical skills, but in judgment and restraint. Leadership was distributed according to wisdom, observation, and reliability, rather than brute strength. Decisions were often discussed quietly, weighing long-term consequences and potential risks. Flexibility was crucial. The tribe adapted its behavior constantly, responding to changes in weather, human activity, and the subtle signs of the land. Conflict, when unavoidable, followed the same philosophy. The tribe did not seek battle for glory, nor did it engage without purpose. Interventions were swift, precise, and targeted. Supply routes could be disrupted, leaders could be misled. Yet these actions were not violent for their own sake. They served survival. Even when outsiders were harmed, it was a byproduct of strategic action rather than desire for revenge or dominance. The tribe's rituals reflected these priorities. Ceremonies were practical, emphasizing observation, attentiveness, and respect for the natural and human world. Children were trained to read not only the environment, but also the behaviors of outsiders, through stories, demonstrations, and participation. In daily activities, they internalized lessons of caution, patience, and the strategic use of invisibility. Over generations, these rituals became second nature, shaping instinct as much as conscious thought. Seasonal cycles structured their lives. In subtle ways, winter demanded caution. Rivers froze unpredictably, marshes became treacherous, and movements slowed under snow and ice. Spring provided opportunities to refresh supplies and explore previously dangerous areas. Summer allowed for extended observation, while autumn became a time of preparation, careful planning, and reinforcement of survival knowledge. Time was not measured by calendars or events, but by the rhythms of the land and the subtle signs of the environment. The tribe's philosophy extended into social cohesion. Families were tightly knit, and the well-being of the collective always outweighed individual desire. Knowledge was shared selectively, only with those deemed ready to understand it fully. Trust was built slowly and could never be taken for granted. A single misstep could compromise safety, so discipline, awareness, and careful observation were embedded in daily life from an early age. Even interactions with outsiders followed these principles. Traders were permitted limited access under careful observation, while potential threats were subtly guided away. The tribe's understanding of human behavior allowed them to anticipate actions, manipulate perception, and preserve autonomy without direct confrontation. Outsiders often left these encounters unsettled, with a vague sense that they had been guided, misled, or carefully watched, never realizing the full extent of the tribe's control. Over centuries, their subtle strategies shaped the behavior of countless outsiders. The Viking raids became legendary precisely because they met resistance in ways they did not expect. Later settlers and explorers encountered similar challenges. Paths that seemed clear but led to impassable areas, rivers that shifted unexpectedly, and forests that appeared denser and more dangerous than they should have been. Outsiders attributed these phenomena to chance or superstition, but they were deliberate, calculated actions designed to preserve the tribe's survival. Even as empires expanded and technology advanced, the tribe remained largely invisible. Maps could not capture their presence, armies could not conquer them, and written records failed to explain the failures encountered in their regions. Their influence was embedded in the land itself, in patterns of movement, perception, and environmental manipulation. Survival, rather than conquest, was their measure of power. The tribe's endurance was also cultural. Knowledge was passed down orally, through observation and practice rather than text. Each generation internalized lessons about the land, human behavior, and survival. Elders guided the young in understanding subtle signs, interpreting patterns, and making decisions based on risk assessment and observation. Over time, this created a continuous chain of expertise, ensuring that the principles of survival remained intact, even as individual members aged and passed on. Their approach to conflict reinforced this philosophy. They did not seek glory or recognition. They engaged only when necessary, using minimal force and maximum discretion. Outsiders were misled, supplies were disrupted, and threats neutralized with precision. This approach preserved the tribe's safety while avoiding unnecessary exposure. It was an application of strategy refined over centuries, rooted in patience, observation, and careful calculation. Even today, traces of their presence can be sensed in the landscape. Hidden trails, shifting wetlands, dense forests, and unusual patterns in nature reflect centuries of careful observation, movement, and influence. Travelers who sense unease, misdirection, or inexplicable challenges in these regions may be encountering the echoes of the tribe's long history, a subtle imprint of a people who survived not by force, but by intelligence, patience, and understanding. Their legacy is therefore both practical and philosophical. They demonstrate that power need not be loud or visible. That survival often depends on patience, subtlety, and understanding, and that influence can be exercised without confrontation, through centuries of careful observation, deliberate movement, and selective interaction. The tribe endured while shaping the behavior of those who entered their lands. In this way, they became a living testament to a quiet philosophy. Strength is not always measured by conquest. Survival requires wisdom, observation, and restraint, and the greatest victories are sometimes those that leave no trace. The tribe's secrets were not hidden in stone or text, but in movement, rhythm, and understanding. Every member knew the landscape in ways outsiders could never hope to grasp. Paths that appeared ordinary concealed subtle clues. Small depressions in soil indicated recent passage. Fallen leaves were sometimes rearranged to mark safe routes or warn of danger. Streams carried messages not in words, but in the direction and speed of their flow. Even the smallest signs could reveal an entire pattern of activity, but only to those trained to read them. These secrets extended beyond the natural world into human behavior. The tribe had long understood that fear, impatience, and pride could be manipulated without direct confrontation. Outsiders who believed themselves in control often became unwitting participants in subtle lessons, led away from areas of importance by signs they misinterpreted as coincidence or misfortune. Traders abandoned paths, explorers failed to establish settlements, and armies withdrew without a fight, all because the tribe had learned to use perception as effectively as any weapon. Within the tribe, knowledge was guarded carefully. Only those deemed ready could learn the most sensitive methods. Young children were first trained to observe, then to interpret, and eventually to act. Elders taught through demonstration rather than explicit instruction, so lessons became instinctive rather than memorized. Every generation added refinements, adapting old techniques to new threats, ensuring continuity of survival without revealing the full breadth of strategy. The daily life of the tribe was intertwined with these secrets. Hunting was as much about understanding the forest as it was about catching prey. Gathering was about minimizing exposure while maximizing resources. Moving through the land required constant awareness, noting wind direction, the sound of water over stones, the way animals reacted, even the behavior of clouds and sunlight. All of these factors were used to ensure the tribe could remain hidden while shaping outcomes around them. Conflict was approached with the same philosophy. The tribe did not seek battle for pride or gain. When intervention was necessary, it was swift, precise, and minimal. Supply routes could be disrupted, leaders misled, and threats neutralized, all without unnecessary exposure. These actions required patience and observation, ensuring that safety was maintained even while influence was exerted. The tribe's rituals reinforced their philosophy. Daily routines emphasized observation and patience. Morning walks and tasks were conducted in silence, teaching the young to listen and watch. Stories told in the evenings carried practical lessons embedded in narrative form, ensuring knowledge passed subtly. These traditions created a culture in which survival skills were internalized, becoming instinctive rather than taught formally. Seasonal awareness was essential. Each year brought different challenges. Winters were cold, marshes dangerous, and rivers unpredictable. Spring offered growth and replenishment. Summer allowed extended observation. Autumn required preparation and foresight. The tribe did not measure time solely in months or years, but in the rhythms of nature and the lessons embedded in seasonal change. The social structure supported these methods. Leadership was based on wisdom, observation, and ability, not brute strength. Every member had a role, and coordination was critical. Decisions were made collectively when necessary, but flexibility allowed the group to adapt to unexpected events. Trust was earned, not assumed. Exposure could be fatal, so everyone adhered to the principles of caution and awareness, ensuring continuity and survival. Interactions with outsiders followed these same principles. Traders were guided carefully, often unaware of the subtle steering. In their movements, potential threats were deterred or misdirected, ensuring minimal risk to the tribe. Even when outsiders sensed unease, they rarely realized the cause or the intelligence guiding it. The tribe's influence was pervasive yet invisible, shaping events without drawing attention to itself. Over generations, these methods became deeply ingrained. Knowledge of the land, patterns of human behavior, and strategies for avoidance and influence were passed seamlessly from elders to children. Mistakes were opportunities to refine understanding. Every action had consequences, and lessons were absorbed instinctively. By the time a child became an adult, the philosophy of the tribe was second nature. Even as technology advanced around them, better weapons, improved maps, faster ships, the tribe adapted quietly. They used the same principles to maintain autonomy and security. Visibility was controlled, movement was calculated, observation remained constant. The outside world could change, but the tribe's approach to survival remained effective. Stories of the tribe, though scattered and vague, reflected this influence. Outsiders recorded strange occurrences, forests that seemed to watch, rivers that shifted unpredictably, marshes that swallowed paths. Attempts to settle or conquer these lands often failed. Scholars speculated about bad luck, superstition, or environmental challenges, never fully connecting these failures to the deliberate strategy of the tribe. Yet the pattern was clear to those who understood subtlety. The tribe's influence endured. Their philosophy extended beyond survival. They recognized that power could be exercised quietly. That influence did not require violence, and that endurance could outlast conquest. Patience, observation, and timing were more potent than brute force. Conflict was to be used sparingly, only when necessary. Strength was measured not in dominance, but in the ability to remain unseen yet effective. Even as centuries passed, these principles guided the tribe through changing circumstances. From Viking raids to shifting empires and colonization attempts, the tribe preserved its autonomy. Movement, observation, and subtle intervention became refined over generations, ensuring that even as the outside world evolved, their philosophy of survival remained intact. The tribe's culture emphasized harmony with the environment. They did not attempt to dominate the land. Instead, they adapted, learned, and integrated. Paths were mapped by observation, settlements concealed, and resources managed sustainably. Every interaction with the environment reinforced lessons in patience, caution, and strategic thinking. Survival was not just physical, it was mental, social, and environmental. The tribe's legacy lies in its subtlety. Where conquerors left ruins, monuments, and stories, the tribe left patterns of survival, knowledge embedded in landscape and human behavior, and an enduring philosophy. Outsiders who encountered the lands sensed unease, misdirection, or inexplicable obstacles, often unaware of the careful intelligence guiding them. Traders left uneasy, explorers failed, armies retreated, all without the tribe ever revealing its full presence. Even today, their influence can be sensed. Forests, rivers, marshes, and hidden valleys carry lessons in observation, caution, and subtle control. Travelers who move carefully and attentively may feel the rhythm of centuries of survival knowledge embedded in the land. These echoes are the legacy of a people who mastered endurance through intelligence, patience, and respect for the unseen. The tribe's story demonstrates that survival does not require violence. It shows that influence can be exercised invisibly, that power need not be loud, and that careful observation and timing can achieve results beyond brute strength. Through centuries of subtle action, they ensured the safety, continuity, and autonomy of their people. Their greatest victories were unseen. Their strategies left no trace, easily detected by outsiders. Yet the consequences were profound. Outsiders retreated, plans failed, and the tribe endured, while empires and armies came and went. Their philosophy proved that survival often depends on wisdom, patience, and subtlety rather than force. Even as centuries unfolded, the tribe's subtle victories accumulated quietly, almost invisibly. Each decision to act or not to act shaped the world around them without requiring visible confrontation. When outsiders attempted to establish settlements in forests or valleys under the tribe's watch, Failure was often inevitable. Crops would struggle in soil that seemed fertile, paths would lead to impassable marshes, and rivers would shift in ways that slowed progress. These outcomes were not accidental, but the result of centuries of learned observation, environmental understanding, and human psychology. The tribe never needed to strike openly. The land itself became an ally, shaped by knowledge and subtle influence. Interactions with outsiders were nuanced. Traders were allowed to exchange goods, but always on terms carefully monitored by the tribe. Routes were controlled indirectly, using environmental cues to guide movement. Outsiders rarely realized the intelligence behind these interventions. Soldiers, explorers, and settlers often felt frustration or unease, misattributing their difficulties to chance or superstition. In reality, the tribe manipulated perception with finesse, ensuring that outsiders remained at a safe distance while preserving the tribe's autonomy. Every success reinforced the philosophy of patience and subtlety. The tribe understood that force could invite retaliation, but manipulation could achieve the same goals with minimal risk. The Vikings had learned this lesson long ago. Generations later, armies and explorers would encounter the same invisible force, never fully recognizing it. By controlling outcomes quietly, the tribe turned the landscape into a living shield, a partner in their survival strategy. Daily life within the tribe continued to revolve around careful observation and subtle mastery of the environment. Children learned to read the forest as naturally as others might read a book. They recognized signs of movement, subtle changes in soil, and patterns of animal behavior. Adults guided them through practical exercises, teaching them to anticipate outcomes and make decisions that preserved safety. Every task, whether gathering food, maintaining shelters, or moving through dense forests, was performed with awareness of both natural and human factors. Seasons shaped not just survival, but culture. Winter demanded extreme caution. When frozen marshes and snow could conceal dangers or create traps, spring provided opportunities to renew and explore, while summer allowed for careful expansion of knowledge and observation. Autumn became a time of preparation, reflection, and strategy. By following natural rhythms, the tribe remained in harmony with the land, ensuring long-term stability and minimizing exposure to unnecessary risk. Conflict, when unavoidable, was precise and efficient. The tribe never sought battle for pride or reward. Interventions were calculated to achieve objectives with minimal exposure. Supply routes were disrupted, leaders misled, and threats neutralized strategically. These actions required patience, observation, and foresight. By avoiding open confrontation whenever possible, the tribe maintained both safety and autonomy. Rituals and traditions reinforced these methods. Stories told during gatherings carried lessons in observation, timing, and discretion. Ceremonies emphasized attentiveness to subtle signs in the environment and in human behavior. Learning was experiential, absorbed through participation rather than formal teaching. Over generations, this created instinctive knowledge that became part of daily life, ensuring continuity of survival and strategy. The tribe's culture also valued collective wisdom. Leadership was determined by experience, judgment, and the ability to interpret both environment and human behavior accurately. Every member had a role, and cohesion was prioritized above individual ambition. Mistakes were analyzed carefully, lessons passed down, and adaptations made seamlessly. The tribe's strength lay not in individual heroism, but in coordinated awareness and measured action. Even as empires expanded and technology advanced, the tribe adapted quietly. They integrated changes when beneficial, retreated when risky, and observed continuously. Visibility was controlled, interactions were deliberate, and influence was exerted subtly. Outsiders were guided unknowingly, their paths altered without confrontation. This invisible mastery ensured survival, even in a world that increasingly relied on maps, records, and written authority. The tribe's influence extended beyond direct survival. Patterns of avoidance and failure among outsiders created a legacy of caution that lasted generations. Traders hesitated before entering certain forests, settlers abandoned attempts at cultivation, and explorers documented areas as cursed or impassable. Scholars often dismissed these accounts, but collectively they demonstrate the tribe's subtle impact. Their power was not measured by conquest, but by the shaping of perception and behavior. Even in modern times, remnants of this influence persist. Forests, marshes, and hidden valleys carry subtle clues embedded by centuries of observation. Travelers who approach these regions with caution may feel unease, notice paths that seem misleading, or encounter natural obstacles that guide them away. These are not mere coincidences. They are echoes of a people who mastered the art of surviving invisibly while influencing the world around them. The philosophy underlying the tribe's endurance was simple yet profound. Strength was measured in endurance and subtle influence rather than force. Observation, patience, and understanding of both nature and human behavior were more powerful than armies or weapons. Conflict was a last resort. Survival depended on discretion, timing, and careful manipulation of outcomes. This approach allowed the tribe to outlast invaders, conquerors, and settlers alike, proving that the quiet and patient can often prevail where the bold fail. Generations internalized these lessons. Knowledge of survival, environmental cues, and human behavior became instinctive. Children were trained to anticipate risk, interpret subtle signs, and act in ways that preserved safety and autonomy. Adults reinforced these skills daily, ensuring that the philosophy of the tribe was continuous, adaptable, and deeply embedded. The tribe's legacy, though invisible, is profound. Outsiders often misattributed failures or difficulties in their lands to superstition, chance, or natural obstacles. Yet these outcomes were the product of careful strategy, observation, and subtle guidance. By avoiding direct confrontation and shaping events quietly, the tribe ensured its survival across centuries, leaving a legacy of subtle influence that outlasted the most powerful armies and empires. Even their rituals reflected this philosophy. Daily routines emphasized observation and awareness. Storytelling conveyed practical knowledge through narrative. Ceremonies and practices trained perception and patience. Every member, from child to elder, learned to act in harmony with both the land and the behavior of outsiders. Over generations, this created a culture where survival was instinctive, knowledge was cumulative, and subtlety was paramount. By mastering the balance between visibility and influence, the tribe survived when others failed. Their strategy was not to dominate, but to endure, to guide rather than confront, to shape outcomes without exposure. These principles, refined over centuries, ensured that the tribe remained intact, even as civilizations rose and fell around them. Their story is a reminder that power is not always loud or visible. Influence can be subtle, endurance can outweigh aggression, and the quiet can shape the course of history. By observing, adapting, and intervening only when necessary, the tribe left a legacy that survives in the land, in instinct, and in the stories of those who ventured into their domains. The spiritual life of the tribe was inseparable from survival. Their connection to the land was not only practical, but deeply sacred. Every forest, river, hill, and marsh held meaning. Children were taught to respect the world around them not simply as a resource, but as a living entity capable of teaching, warning, and guiding. Every interaction with nature became both a practical lesson and a spiritual ritual. The tribe did not worship in the sense outsiders might recognize. Their devotion was to observation, understanding, and harmony with the unseen forces of the environment. From an early age, the young learned to interpret subtle signals. A bird's sudden flight could indicate danger, a ripple in water might reveal passage, and even the scent of disturbed earth could hold a warning. These signs were treated with reverence, not fear. To the tribe, nature was a teacher, and understanding its language was essential to survival. Every day became a practice of mindfulness, attunement, and careful observation. Elders were central to spiritual and practical guidance. Their wisdom was rooted in decades of immersion in both environment and human behavior. They did not issue commands lightly. Instead, they demonstrated, instructed through stories, and cultivated awareness in younger members. These lessons were often subtle. A child might be guided to notice the way moss grows along a stream, or to sense the shifting wind patterns that carried scents and sounds from miles away. Over time, these small lessons formed an intricate understanding of the land and its rhythms, preparing the young for the complex challenges of survival. Rituals reinforced these teachings. Mornings might begin with silent observation, noting minute changes in the environment. Midday could involve careful movement through forests to gather resources, while leaving no trace. Evenings were a time for storytelling, where practical knowledge was encoded into narrative. Tales were rarely about heroes or battles. Instead, they described lessons in patience, perception, and the consequences of missteps. Through story, the tribe preserved memory, strategy, and philosophy in a form both accessible and profound. Seasons played a spiritual as well as practical role. Winter's stillness demanded caution and introspection. The long nights became periods of reflection and quiet training in observation. Spring symbolized renewal, growth, and careful expansion of knowledge. Summer allowed extended exploration, testing limits while refining skills. Autumn was a time of preparation, understanding the rhythms that would guide survival through the next winter. By aligning with seasonal cycles, the tribe remained in harmony with the land and attuned to both opportunity and risk. The tribe's philosophy extended beyond the natural into human interaction. Outsiders were observed and assessed, not with hostility, but with careful attention. Traders, settlers, and explorers were often guided without confrontation, subtly influenced by environmental cues, misleading signs, or carefully orchestrated perception. The tribe understood human behavior as deeply as they understood the forest. Pride, impatience, fear, and curiosity became tools and indicators in navigating encounters with those who might threaten their autonomy. Conflict was approached with the same spiritual and philosophical precision. The tribe did not seek battle for pride, gain, or recognition. Intervention occurred only when necessary and always with calculated precision. Supply lines could be disrupted, leaders misled, and threats neutralized subtly. The tribe's principle was always to preserve safety and autonomy while minimizing exposure. Even their interventions became lessons in restraint, patience, and careful observation, teaching younger generations the art of measured action. Every action within the tribe was guided by a balance of practical and spiritual understanding. Movement, gathering, observation, and interaction were conducted with mindfulness. Mistakes were opportunities to learn, refine, and adapt. Every success reinforced the philosophy that survival depended not on force, but on wisdom, patience, and harmony with both environment and human behavior. Stories told in the evenings carried layers of meaning. Beyond the immediate lesson in survival, they embedded subtle, moral, social, and spiritual truths. A tale of a forest path that misled travelers might teach both caution and humility. A story of an animal observed in its habitat could impart lessons on timing, patience, and the understanding of natural rhythms. Children internalized these narratives, learning instinctively to see the world as a living, dynamic network of interconnections. The tribe's social structure reflected this philosophy. Elders guided, not commanded. Leaders emerged through wisdom and understanding rather than force. Every member had a role, and cohesion was prioritized over individual ambition. Trust, patience, and careful observation were valued above strength or speed. The tribe understood that mistakes could be fatal, so discipline and awareness were woven into daily life. Even interactions with outsiders were informed by spiritual principles. Guidance, misdirection, and observation were exercised subtly and deliberately. Outsiders often sensed unease or misdirection, but rarely understood the intelligence behind it. Traders left with goods. Explorers failed to establish permanent settlements. Armies retreated all, without the tribe ever revealing their full presence. Their power lay not in confrontation, but in foresight, patience, and subtle manipulation of outcomes. Over centuries, these practices ensured continuity. Knowledge passed orally, through demonstration and ritual, from one generation to the next. Environmental mastery, observation of human behavior, and strategic decision-making became instinctive. The tribe's survival philosophy became a lived experience, deeply embedded in culture and reinforced through everyday practice. Even as technology advanced and empires rose, the tribe adapted quietly. Visibility was carefully controlled, interactions were deliberate, and influence was exerted subtly. The principles that had guided them during Viking incursions now allowed them to navigate colonial expansion, new trade routes, and shifting political boundaries without losing autonomy. Their philosophy of survival remained resilient and effective. The tribe's greatest strength was in invisibility paired with influence. They demonstrated that survival could be achieved without dominance, that understanding could outweigh force, and that quiet, consistent strategy could outlast armies and empires. Their victories were not recorded in history books, yet their consequences shaped generations of outsiders and preserved the autonomy of the tribe across centuries. Even now, Subtle echoes of the tribe's philosophy persist in the landscape. Forests, marshes, hidden valleys, and winding paths carry lessons for those who observe carefully. Travelers moving attentively may feel guidance, caution, or a rhythm that encourages patience and mindfulness. These are the residual effects of centuries of careful observation, strategic invisibility, and spiritual attunement to both environment and human behavior. The tribe's legacy is a testament to quiet endurance. Strength was measured in patience, observation, and subtle influence rather than conquest or recognition. Survival depended on harmony with nature, understanding human behavior, and acting with wisdom rather than force. Through centuries of careful guidance, strategic invisibility, and mindful action, the tribe preserved both life and autonomy, leaving a lasting, though largely unseen, mark on the world. Over generations, the tribe had mastered the art of subtle influence. Their victories were rarely recorded in battlefields or chroniclers, but they were no less profound. Small acts of misdirection, careful guidance of movement, and controlled visibility shaped the behavior of countless outsiders. Traders, explorers, soldiers, and settlers all encountered anomalous paths that led nowhere, rivers that changed unexpectedly, and forests that seemed alive with hidden obstacles. These were not accidents. They were the product of careful observation, strategic planning, and the application of accumulated wisdom passed down through generations. Children were taught to notice the smallest details, often before they could even articulate what they observed. A bent blade of grass could indicate recent passage. A broken twig might reveal weight and direction. Birds' songs, shifts in the wind, and the movement of clouds all became tools in understanding both the land and the humans who traveled through it. This knowledge was deeply practical, yet it carried a spiritual dimension. Every observation reinforced the tribe's philosophy. Life was a series of patterns, and survival depended on recognizing, understanding, and, when necessary, guiding them. Adults refined these skills daily. Hunting was as much an exercise in understanding environmental cues as in capturing food. Gathering required awareness of safety, concealment, and sustainability. Even movement through seemingly empty forests was a deliberate act, each step calculated to minimize exposure while maximizing information gathered. The tribe's power lay in such mastery being everywhere and nowhere at once, influencing outcomes without confrontation. Conflict, when unavoidable, was always precise and minimal. They never sought to dominate or impress. Instead, they targeted only what threatened survival. Supply lines were subtly disrupted, leaders misled, and areas made temporarily inaccessible. Outsiders often perceived these challenges as luck, superstition, or the unpredictability of the land. Few ever realized that behind every apparent misfortune was a sophisticated strategy honed over centuries. Stories, rituals, and teaching reinforced these methods. Evening tales told around controlled fires encoded lessons in perception, patience, and timing. These narratives were not merely entertaining, they were practical instruction, passed in ways that ensured instinctive understanding. Through such storytelling, the tribe embedded strategy in culture, making every member a carrier of subtle wisdom. Seasons dictated not only survival tactics, but also the rhythm of teaching and practice. Winter demanded restraint and careful observation. Snow, ice, and frozen marshes posed both threat and opportunity, teaching patience and foresight. Spring brought renewal and the careful expansion of knowledge. Summer offered extended periods for observation and experimentation. Autumn was a time for reflection and preparation, reinforcing lessons from the year and anticipating future challenges. By attuning themselves to seasonal cycles, the tribe remained in harmony with the land, ensuring their continued survival. Social structure reinforced strategic effectiveness. Leadership was earned through wisdom, observation, and judgment, rather than through strength or dominance. Every member had a defined role, and cohesion was paramount. Trust and discipline were cultivated from childhood, ensuring that mistakes were rare and, when they occurred, became lessons for all. This balance of individual skill and collective coordination allowed the tribe to respond to threats and opportunities efficiently, maintaining autonomy in a world that often sought to impose control. Interactions with outsiders were calculated carefully. Traders were guided, often unknowingly, along paths that ensured safety while preserving the tribe's interests. Explorers frequently encountered obstacles that appeared natural but were subtly manipulated. Soldiers and armies, unaware of the tribe's strategies, withdrew in frustration, often attributing failure to misfortune. The tribe's influence was pervasive yet invisible, shaping outcomes without revealing itself. Even as empires rose and fell, technology advanced, and political borders shifted, the tribe adapted quietly. They observed constantly, acted only when necessary, and maintained control over visibility. Their methods, developed long before modern tools existed, proved effective even in changing times. They demonstrated that power could exist without visibility and that influence could be exercised without direct confrontation. The tribe's greatest strength lay in cumulative experience. Each generation inherited lessons refined over centuries. Mistakes were corrected, strategies were enhanced, and knowledge of both the environment and human behavior became instinctive. Children absorbed lessons naturally, through daily practice and guided observation. Elders ensured continuity by demonstrating rather than instructing directly, allowing understanding to develop organically. This approach ensured that even when direct confrontation was impossible or dangerous, the tribe retained control over outcomes. Outsiders' decisions were influenced subtly by environment, perception, and instinct. Traders abandoned risky ventures, explorers failed to establish settlements, and armies retreated all, without recognizing the invisible hand guiding them. The tribe achieved safety, autonomy, and survival not through force, but through intelligence, patience, and subtlety. Even modern observers, walking through the landscapes once dominated by the tribe, may notice traces of their influence. Forests, rivers, marshes, and valleys carry patterns that guide, warn, or mislead. Travelers moving attentively can sense rhythms that encourage patience, caution, and respect for unseen forces. These subtle imprints, often dismissed as coincidence or superstition, are the legacy of centuries of careful observation, strategic invisibility, and continuous refinement of survival techniques. The philosophy underlying the tribe's endurance is both simple and profound. Strength is measured in patience, observation, and subtle influence, rather than in brute force. Conflict is a last resort, used strategically and sparingly. Survival depends on understanding patterns in both nature and human behavior, and acting with foresight and discretion. By mastering this philosophy, the tribe ensured autonomy and continuity even as civilizations, armies, and empires rose and fell around them. Even today, echoes of their influence remain. The landscape carries lessons for those who observe closely. Rivers, paths, and forests offer subtle guidance, warning, and instruction. Travelers may sense patterns, obstacles, or shifts that appear natural but are shaped by centuries of accumulated knowledge. These are the residual effects of a people who mastered the art of unseen influence, proving that survival and power can exist without visibility, domination, or overt control. Through these centuries, the tribe became a model of subtle power. They demonstrated that influence could be achieved quietly, that survival could be ensured through careful observation and action, and that knowledge passed across generations could be more effective than any weapon. This story teaches that patience, awareness, and strategic subtlety can overcome challenges that brute force alone cannot. The tribe's victories, though often invisible to outsiders, were cumulative and lasting. Each action, misdirection, or subtle intervention preserved safety, reinforced autonomy, and ensured continuity. Outsiders rarely realized the extent of their influence, interpreting failures as misfortune, superstition, or environmental difficulty. Yet behind every small victory lay centuries of careful learning, observation, and refinement. In this way, the tribe left a legacy that transcends time. Their influence persists in the land, in the patterns of human behavior, and in the subtle rhythms of observation and caution that remain for those who follow the paths they once protected. Their story is a testament to the power of patience, wisdom, an invisible strategia, philosophy of survival that continues to resonate long after direct encounters have ended. The tribe's survival depended on constant adaptation. Every generation faced new challenges, from shifting weather patterns to the arrival of outsiders with unfamiliar technology and strategies. Yet the principles of patience, observation, and subtle influence remained constant. The tribe refined its techniques continuously, learning not only from mistakes, but from careful study of natural and human patterns. They understood that flexibility was as important as skill, and that survival required both foresight and the ability to adjust when circumstances changed. Daily life was a continuous practice in observation and adaptation. Children learned to move quietly through forests, noting subtle changes in the terrain. Birds, insects, wind, and water all carried meaning, and the young were trained to interpret these signals instinctively. Adults maintained this vigilance while performing essential tasks such as hunting, gathering, or monitoring the boundaries of their territory. Every action had dual purposes, achieving practical goals while also reinforcing skills in perception, awareness, and anticipation. Hunting and food collection were exercises in both skill and strategy. Predators and prey alike were studied meticulously. Movement was calculated to minimize exposure while maximizing efficiency. Food was never wasted. Every plant, animal, and water source was valued and managed sustainably. Even the placement of shelters reflected deep understanding of terrain, visibility, and resource availability. Nothing was random. The environment was treated as both ally and teacher. Seasonal cycles dictated rhythm and strategy. Winter demanded extreme caution, as frozen marshes, shifting ice, and snow could conceal danger as easily as opportunity. Spring allowed for renewal, planting, and careful exploration. Summer provided extended periods for observation and refinement of techniques. Autumn became a time of preparation, reflection, and reinforcing lessons learned throughout the year. By aligning their actions with these natural rhythms, the tribe maintained harmony with the environment while maximizing safety and efficiency. The tribe's social structure reinforced adaptation. Leadership was earned through wisdom and demonstrated ability, rather than through physical strength or force. Every member had a role, and collective cohesion was prioritized above individual ambition. Mistakes were analyzed, lessons passed down, and strategies refined. Trust and discipline ensured that every action contributed to the safety and longevity of the group. This cohesion allowed the tribe to respond fluidly to environmental and human challenges. Interaction with outsiders was a constant exercise in strategic mastery. Traders were allowed to approach under carefully controlled conditions, guided subtly to ensure minimal risk. Explorers often encountered misdirection in paths, rivers, or forests. Armies faced unseen obstacles that slowed progress or rendered operations futile. Outsiders frequently misinterpreted these events as accidents, superstition, or misfortune. In reality, every outcome was carefully orchestrated, demonstrating the tribe's unparalleled understanding of both perception and influence. Conflict, when unavoidable, followed precise strategy. The tribe did not seek battle for prestige or conquest. Interventions were targeted, minimal, and effective. Supply lines could be disrupted, key leaders misled, and movement hindered, all executed with maximum efficiency and minimal risk. Even these interventions were opportunities to reinforce lessons in patience, observation, and careful timing, ensuring the tribe's philosophy was internalized by younger members. Rituals played a vital role in maintaining strategic mastery. Daily routines emphasized observation, attentiveness, and harmonious interaction with the environment. Storytelling conveyed lessons through narrative, encoding strategy, caution, and timing into memorable tales. Each member of the tribe absorbed these lessons naturally, creating instinctive knowledge that informed every action. Knowledge passed orally and experientially ensured continuity across generations, even in the absence of written records. The tribe's understanding of human behavior complemented environmental mastery. Pride, impatience, fear, and curiosity were recognized as patterns to be observed and sometimes influenced. By guiding behavior subtly, the tribe could shape outcomes without confrontation. Traders, explorers, and armies were often influenced unknowingly, altering their movements, decisions, and plans in ways that preserved the tribe's safety and autonomy. These methods demonstrated that strategy and patience often outweighed direct force. Over centuries, this combination of environmental and social mastery created a resilient system of survival. Knowledge accumulated, refined, and passed down through generations. The tribe developed an intuitive understanding of cause and effect, patterns of behavior, and subtle environmental cues. Mistakes were never wasted. They became part of the collective learning process. Over time, the tribe's ability to survive and maintain autonomy became nearly instinctive. Even as empires expanded and technology advanced, the tribe adapted without losing core principles. They monitored changes in human movement, technology, and settlement patterns. Adjustments were made to tactics, movement, and interactions to maintain safety and influence. The tribe's philosophy, combining patience, observation, and strategic subtlety, proved effective even in rapidly changing circumstances. The tribe's influence often went unnoticed. Forests, marshes, rivers, and paths were shaped subtly over centuries. Outsiders encountered obstacles and misdirections that seemed natural but were intentionally arranged. Traders abandoned ventures, explorers failed to establish settlements, and armies withdrew, interpreting their failures as misfortune. In truth, the tribe's strategic mastery had guided every outcome, proving that invisible influence could be as powerful as open confrontation. Their legacy endures in the rhythms of the landscape. Travelers who move with attention may notice subtle patterns: shifted branches, disturbed soil, altered waterways that guide movement and provide unseen lessons. These are echoes of a people who understood the land, human behavior, and the interplay between observation, strategy, and timing. Every subtle mark left behind is a testament to centuries of careful adaptation, strategic mastery, and patient observation. The tribe's story demonstrates that survival does not require brute force. It shows that influence can be exerted invisibly, that careful observation often surpasses direct confrontation, and that knowledge passed through generations can shape outcomes more effectively than armies or technology. Their victories were cumulative, quiet, and profound, leaving lasting effects without ever seeking recognition. Through all of this, the tribe maintained cohesion, discipline, and wisdom. Mistakes were analyzed, lessons passed down, and strategies refined. Children became skilled observers and careful actors. Adults refined their abilities daily, and elders ensured continuity. The principles of patience, observation, and subtle influence became instinctive, forming the core of a culture that survived countless external threats. Even modern landscapes carry traces of this mastery. Forests, rivers, marshes, and hidden valleys reflect centuries of careful observation and influence. Travelers who approach attentively may sense guidance, misdirection, or subtle challenges that encourage patience and awareness. These remnants of strategy and knowledge are the enduring legacy of a people who survived through intelligence, restraint, and deep understanding of both nature and human behavior. The tribe's philosophy is timeless. Endurance, observation, subtle influence, and harmonization with the environment are as powerful as force. Through centuries of practice, refinement, and patient teaching, they ensured survival, autonomy, and continuity. Their story is a quiet lesson in strategy, demonstrating that wisdom and subtlety can outlast even the most formidable armies and empires. The tribe's mastery of the environment was inseparable from their rituals and daily life. Every sunrise and sunset marked a subtle ritual, guiding the rhythm of the day and reinforcing lessons of observation, patience, and timing. Children were trained to move silently through undergrowth, to read changes in moss, soil, or water, and to interpret the faintest signals from animals or wind. These were not merely practical exercises but also spiritual training, instilling a deep awareness of the interconnectedness of life. Adults acted as both guides and examples. Hunting, gathering, and movement were executed with precise attention, teaching through demonstration rather than explicit instruction. Even seemingly mundane tasks were layered with lessons in patience, timing, and careful observation. A child might notice the alignment of stones along a path or the placement of leaves over a trail, learning to understand not only the environment but also the subtle influence humans could have upon it. Seasons dictated more than survival. They shaped the very rituals and practices of the tribe. Winter required heightened caution, careful selection of paths, and precise knowledge of frozen rivers and marshes. Spring signaled renewal and cautious expansion into previously avoided areas. Summer allowed long periods for observation, experimentation, and refinement of movement, while autumn became a time for reflection, preparation, and reinforcement of lessons learned. These seasonal patterns were internalized, becoming a natural rhythm of life that guided every decision and action. Rituals intertwined with these patterns, blending practicality with philosophy. Morning walks emphasized silence and observation. Midday activities focused on skillful movement, resource collection, and attention to potential threats or changes. Evening storytelling encoded lessons, preserving both knowledge and culture. Myths, often perceived by outsiders as superstition, were actually subtle instruction, guiding children and adults alike in the art of perception, patience, and strategic thinking. The tribe's understanding of human behavior was as refined as their environmental knowledge. Outsiders, whether traders, explorers, or armies, were assessed with meticulous care. Pride, fear, curiosity, and hesitation were observed and anticipated. By subtly guiding perception through environmental cues, misdirection, or indirect influence, the tribe ensured safety without confrontation. Outsiders often left uneasy or misled, never recognizing the intelligence shaping their experience. Even in conflict, the tribe's philosophy emphasized efficiency and subtlety. Engagements were deliberate, minimal, and precise. Supply routes could be disrupted, leaders misled, and obstacles created all, designed to achieve strategic goals without revealing the tribe's presence unnecessarily. These interventions reinforced lessons for younger members. Patience, observation, and discretion were the tools of survival, far more effective than open violence. Knowledge was carefully curated and passed down. Elders demonstrated skills, taught observation, and guided interpretation rather than dictating rules. Children learned through participation, experience, and subtle instruction. Every generation added refinements, adapting techniques to new environmental and human challenges. Mistakes were analyzed, and lessons absorbed instinctively, ensuring that the philosophy of the tribe remained alive and effective. Even as technology evolved and empires expanded, the tribe maintained autonomy through subtle mastery. Visibility was controlled, movement carefully calculated, and influence exerted without overt confrontation. Traders were guided unknowingly, explorers misdirected, and armies frustrated. Outsiders frequently attributed these outcomes to chance or superstition, never understanding the deep strategic thinking and accumulated wisdom behind every success. Daily life reinforced these principles. Each movement, whether in hunting, gathering, or traveling, carried lessons in observation, timing, and precision. Patterns in animal behavior, water flow, wind direction, and even sunlight were studied and integrated into decisions. The tribe's actions were deliberate, shaping outcomes while maintaining invisibility. By aligning their routines with natural and human rhythms, they ensured continuity, safety, and influence without exposure. Rituals further encoded the tribe's philosophy. Storytelling embedded practical knowledge in narrative form. Tasks and movements served as exercises in skill, patience, and subtlety. Observing children learned instinctively, internalizing lessons long before they could articulate them. Knowledge, strategy, and philosophy became inseparable from daily life, ensuring that every member contributed to collective survival and mastery. The tribe's social cohesion was central to strategy. Leadership was determined by wisdom, judgment, and observation, not force. Every member understood their role and the importance of cohesion. Mistakes were analyzed collectively and solutions refined. Trust, patience, and discipline allowed for coordinated action in response to environmental or human challenges. Collective intelligence, rather than individual heroism, became the foundation of survival. Interactions with outsiders highlighted the tribe's strategic sophistication. Paths were subtly altered, rivers and terrain shaped to mislead, and signs of presence controlled to influence perception. Traders, explorers, and armies encountered obstacles that appeared natural but were deliberately orchestrated. Outsiders often misinterpreted these outcomes, attributing them to bad luck, superstition, or environmental challenges. Yet the tribe's mastery of environment and behavior ensured continued autonomy. Even in modern landscapes, the tribe's influence persists. Forests, rivers, marshes, and hidden valleys carry subtle guidance, obstacles, and lessons for those who observe closely. Travelers may notice displaced branches, shifted stones, or altered paths that guide movement or warn of hidden dangers. These subtle marks are remnants of centuries of observation, strategic action, and careful environmental manipulation, demonstrating the tribe's enduring mastery. The tribe's philosophy emphasizes that survival does not require domination. Influence can be invisible, victories quiet, and power subtle. Knowledge passed through generations, observation of environment and behavior, and disciplined practice can achieve results beyond the reach of force. Their story illustrates that patience, foresight, and understanding often surpass brute strength in both survival and long-term impact. Through centuries of careful observation, strategic intervention, and harmonious interaction with the environment, the tribe ensured continuity, safety, and autonomy. Every action, from the smallest movement to the most deliberate misdirection, reinforced lessons in perception, patience, and discretion. The tribe's cumulative wisdom shaped not only their survival, but also the behavior of countless outsiders, leaving a legacy that endures quietly yet profoundly. The tribe's legacy was woven into the land itself. Forests, rivers, and marshes held patterns shaped over centuries, subtle signals for those trained to see them. Outsiders often perceived these as obstacles, misfortune, or the unpredictability of nature, but in reality, they were the product of generations of careful observation and deliberate manipulation. Every fallen branch, every shifted stone, and every subtle change in terrain carried meaning, guiding or warning those who traversed the land. This invisible guidance allowed the tribe to remain autonomous while influencing the behavior of those who came near. Children were trained from a young age to perceive these subtle patterns. Observation became instinctive. They could discern the difference between natural movement and deliberate alteration, the sound of water flowing differently over rocks, the displacement of soil, the direction of fallen leaves. All of these carried messages. Training in perception and pattern recognition became second nature, shaping not only survival skills, but also a philosophy of attentive living. Adults maintained and refined these patterns, ensuring that the landscape continued to serve as both a protective barrier and a tool of subtle influence. Paths were concealed, rivers occasionally redirected, and vegetation managed to obscure or reveal trails as needed. Hunting, gathering, and movement were conducted with careful attention, both to the immediate task and to the broader strategic purpose. Every action was multifunctional, preserving safety, teaching the young, and maintaining the tribe's subtle influence over outsiders. Rituals reinforced the connection between practical mastery and philosophical understanding. Morning walks, for instance, were conducted in silence to heighten awareness. Midday activities were exercises in skill and observation, teaching both timing and discretion. Evenings were reserved for storytelling, where practical lessons were woven into narrative, embedding strategy, patience, and caution in memorable tales. This combination of practice, ritual, and narrative ensured that knowledge passed seamlessly from one generation to the next, internalized as instinct rather than instruction. Seasonal rhythms dictated not only survival tactics but also the timing of lessons and activities. Winter demanded heightened awareness and careful movement, with frozen marshes and snow-covered terrain presenting both risks and learning opportunities. Spring allowed for cautious expansion, replenishment of resources, and refinement of strategies. Summer offered extended observation and the testing of techniques, while autumn became a time of reflection, preparation, and consolidation of lessons learned. These natural cycles reinforced the tribe's philosophy, aligning daily life with environmental rhythms to ensure both survival and mastery. The tribe's understanding of human behavior was equally sophisticated. Outsiders were observed meticulously, whether traders, explorers, or armies. Patterns of pride, impatience, curiosity, and hesitation were studied and, when necessary, subtly influenced. Through environmental cues, misdirection, and strategic positioning, the tribe could guide the actions of outsiders without confrontation. Travelers, often left unsettled or misled, unaware of the intelligence shaping their experience. In this way, the tribe exercised influence quietly but effectively, ensuring autonomy while minimizing risk. Even in conflict, the tribe adhered to principles of precision and subtlety. Engagements were deliberate, targeted, and minimal. Supply lines could be disrupted, leaders misled, and obstacles placed strategically. These actions achieved objectives without unnecessary exposure and served as lessons in patience, observation, and timing for younger members. By modeling careful action, the tribe ensured that the philosophy of restraint and strategic subtlety was reinforced across generations. Knowledge was carefully curated and transmitted. Elders guided through demonstration and example rather than direct instruction, allowing lessons to be absorbed instinctively. Mistakes were analyzed collectively, refined strategies were passed down, and each generation added adaptations based on new observations or challenges. This continuous refinement created a system of cumulative wisdom, ensuring that the tribe's philosophy remained effective despite external changes or threats. Interactions with outsiders exemplified this mastery. Traders were guided without realizing the control exerted over their routes. Explorers faced natural obstacles that had been subtly manipulated, causing delays or failures. Armies withdrew in frustration, attributing setbacks to chance, superstition, or the environment. Outsiders rarely understood that these outcomes were the result of deliberate strategy, highlighting the tribe's unique blend of environmental mastery, behavioral insight, and patient intervention. Even modern landscapes retain traces of this influence. Travelers may notice subtle patterns: disturbed soil, altered streams, shifted vegetation. These cues, often dismissed as coincidence, reflect centuries of deliberate shaping. Forests, marshes, and valleys become tools, guiding or warning those who enter. Observers may feel intuition, hesitation, or subtle misdirection, evidence of a philosophy honed over generations, blending environmental mastery with understanding of human psychology. The tribe's philosophy demonstrates that survival does not require force. Influence can be invisible, victories quiet, and autonomy preserved without confrontation. Observation, patience, and strategic subtlety often surpass brute strength in shaping outcomes. Knowledge, passed through careful teaching and experience, becomes more powerful than any weapon. The tribe's enduring presence is proof that the quiet and patient can outlast the bold and aggressive, achieving lasting influence without recognition. Their cumulative victories were subtle yet profound. Every misdirected path, failed expedition, an unrecognized obstacle reinforced the tribe's security while shaping outsider behavior. Knowledge passed from one generation to the next ensured continuity, with each child absorbing instinctive understanding of survival, observation, and strategic subtlety. The philosophy of patience and discretion became inseparable from culture, embedding itself in every action, ritual, and story. Through careful observation, disciplined practice, and strategic intervention, the tribe preserved autonomy across centuries. Their victories, though invisible to most, were cumulative and enduring. Forests, rivers, and hidden valleys reflect centuries of careful manipulation and understanding. Travelers, unaware of these legacies, may sense subtle guidance, misdirection, or patterns that encourage caution and mindfulness. Every detail of the landscape serves as evidence of a philosophy centered on observation, patience, and influence, without confrontation. This philosophy extends beyond survival. It demonstrates that intelligence and subtlety often outweigh force. Power need not be loud or visible. Influence can shape outcomes quietly yet effectively. The tribe's story shows that patience, careful observation, and cumulative knowledge can secure survival, autonomy, and enduring impact even in the face of armies, empires, and technological change. By integrating environmental mastery, social cohesion, and strategic subtlety, the tribe created a system of survival that was virtually invisible yet profoundly effective. Every movement, ritual, and story reinforced lessons in perception, timing, and discretion. Outsiders encountered misdirection, obstacles, and subtle guidance without ever realizing the influence shaping their experience. The tribe's autonomy remained intact, preserved through centuries of careful observation and deliberate, patient action. Their legacy is still present today, echoing in forests, marshes, and hidden valleys. Travelers who observe carefully may detect subtle cues, guiding movement or indicating unseen patterns. These remnants of centuries of strategy, observation, and subtle influence reflect a people who mastered survival not through force, but through intelligence, patience, and harmonious interaction with both environment and human behavior. The ultimate strength of the tribe lay not in weapons or numbers, but in philosophy of survival, observation, and strategic subtlety honed over centuries. Every decision, every movement, and every interaction was guided by an understanding that patience, perception, and restraint could achieve outcomes far beyond brute force. Outsiders often failed to grasp the depth of this intelligence, interpreting their difficulties as misfortune, superstition, or natural hazard. Yet the truth was far more profound. The tribe had mastered an approach to life where influence, discretion, and harmony with nature were more potent than conquest or domination. From birth, children were trained to notice patterns in both nature and human behavior. Small details, slightly disturbed soil, subtle changes in animal activity. Shifts in wind or water became part of a language the tribe spoke instinctively. Observation was paired with patience, teaching that outcomes were often determined not by immediate action, but by careful, calculated timing. Every step through the forest, every gathering of food, every movement across rivers and marshes reinforced lessons in awareness, discretion, and environmental mastery. Adults guided these lessons with care, demonstrating without imposing. Hunting was a school in observation, noticing tracks, interpreting scents, predicting animal behavior, and understanding the interplay between predator and prey. Gathering required awareness of concealment, safety, and sustainability. Even the act of traveling was strategic, teaching lessons in patience, calculation, and influence. All these skills reinforced a philosophy that emphasized foresight and restraint over impulsive action. The tribe's mastery extended beyond the physical environment into the realm of human behavior. Outsiders, traders, explorers, soldiers, or settlers were observed meticulously. Pride, fear, curiosity, hesitation, and even overconfidence were patterns to be studied and, when necessary, subtly influenced. Paths could be redirected, streams modified, signs placed to guide perception. Outsiders, unaware of the careful orchestration, often found themselves frustrated, misled, or retreating. Through these actions, the tribe maintained autonomy without confrontation, demonstrating that influence could be exerted quietly, yet effectively. Even in direct conflict, the tribe adhered to principles of precision and efficiency. Engagements were rare and deliberate, designed to achieve strategic goals with minimal risk. Supply routes could be disrupted, key leaders misled, or areas rendered temporarily inaccessible. Each intervention reinforced lessons in patience, observation, and timing for younger members. By modeling calculated action, elders ensured that every generation internalized the philosophy of restraint, strategic subtlety, and environmental mastery. Rituals and daily practices reinforced this philosophy. Mornings were often spent in silent observation, honing awareness and perception. Midday activities emphasized skill, timing, and careful movement. Evenings featured storytelling, encoding lessons in narrative form. Tales rarely glorified heroes or battle. Instead, they illustrated strategy, patience, observation, and the consequences of misjudgment. Through repetition, observation, and participation, knowledge became instinctive, embedded deeply within the culture of the tribe. Seasons were integral to this philosophy. Winter demanded caution, reflection, and careful navigation of frozen landscapes. Spring signaled renewal, careful exploration, and the testing of strategies. Summer allowed extended observation, practice, and refinement of skills, while autumn became a period of preparation, reflection, and consolidation of lessons learned. By aligning their actions with natural rhythms, the tribe maximized safety, efficiency, and understanding of both environment and human behavior. Social structure reinforced strategic mastery. Leadership was based on wisdom, experience, and judgment, rather than strength. Every member had a role, and cohesion was essential. Mistakes were analyzed collectively, and strategies refined. Trust and discipline allowed coordinated action, ensuring that the tribe could respond to threats or opportunities effectively. Collective intelligence, rather than individual heroism, was the backbone of survival. The tribe's subtle influence extended through centuries of interaction with outsiders. Traders were guided unknowingly along safe paths that also preserved the tribe's interests. Explorers were misdirected by subtle environmental cues, preventing settlement or overreach. Armies retreated or failed in campaigns, attributing setbacks to luck, superstition, or environmental difficulty. Few ever understood that each outcome was the product of careful observation, accumulated wisdom, and precise, patient action. Even today, the landscapes once inhabited by the tribe carry echoes of their philosophy. Forests, rivers, marshes, and hidden valleys retain subtle cues, shifted stones, displaced branches, altered water paths, or hidden clearings. Travelers who move attentively may sense guidance, hesitation, or misdirection, traces of centuries of strategy and environmental mastery. These remnants reveal a people who achieved influence and survival, not through force, but through intelligence, patience, and harmony with both nature and human behavior. The tribe's ultimate survival philosophy demonstrates that endurance, discretion, and observation can outweigh aggression. Influence can be exerted quietly, victories can be invisible, and autonomy preserved without confrontation. Knowledge, passed from one generation to the next, is a more powerful tool than any weapon. The tribe's approach proves that the careful, patient, and observant can outlast armies and empires, shaping outcomes across centuries. Every action, from a subtle shift in a trail to the guidance of an outsider's perception, reinforced this philosophy. Cumulative victories, though unseen, preserved autonomy, influenced human behavior, and maintained safety. Knowledge was internalized, instincts sharpened, and strategy perfected over generations. The tribe's quiet mastery of both environment and human nature ensured survival, autonomy, and influence across centuries. Their story offers lessons for any era. Brute force is transient, but careful observation, patience, and subtle influence endure. Environmental mastery, paired with understanding human psychology, can shape outcomes without confrontation. Strategic subtlety ensures survival, autonomy, and long-term impact. Through centuries of careful practice, adaptation, and guidance, the tribe achieved enduring success that few could see, yet whose effects were undeniable. In the modern world, subtle echoes remain. Travelers through forests, marshes, and hidden valleys may sense paths, patterns, or obstacles that guide perception or movement. These are remnants of centuries of accumulated knowledge and careful orchestration. Even without realizing it, those who encounter these subtle patterns experience the legacy of a people who mastered survival and influence through patience, observation, and strategic subtlety. The tribe's philosophy is timeless. Careful observation, strategic patience, and harmonious interaction with environment and human behavior are more powerful than force. Knowledge, instinct, and subtle influence create a resilience that persists across generations. Their story teaches that survival is not about domination, but about understanding, patience, and guiding outcomes quietly yet effectively. Through centuries of meticulous observation, ritual, and strategic mastery, the tribe preserved life, autonomy, and influence. Every detail of their landscape, every subtle cue, and every story passed down carried lessons in patience, perception, and strategic subtlety. Their ultimate survival philosophy proves that intelligence, restraint, and harmony with both nature and human behavior can secure continuity and influence far beyond the reach of conventional power. The tribe's story is one of quiet endurance and invisible influence. Their survival and autonomy were never achieved through overt displays of power or domination. Instead, they relied on patient observation, careful calculation, and a profound understanding of both the environment and human behavior. Every generation learned to see beyond the immediate, to anticipate consequences, and to act with precision and discretion. These lessons were embedded not only in practical actions, but in stories, rituals, and daily life, ensuring that knowledge became instinctive and enduring. The land itself became both teacher and protector. Forests, rivers, marshes, and hidden valleys were observed, understood, and subtly shaped. Paths were guided, rivers altered, and vegetation managed to conceal or reveal trails as needed. Outsiders often interpreted these as accidents or natural obstacles, unaware of the centuries of intelligence and strategy behind them. The tribe had transformed the environment into a living extension of their philosophy, where survival and influence could be maintained without confrontation. From the moment children were born, they were immersed in this philosophy. Observation, patience, and attentiveness were not taught through lectures, but through experience. A child might learn to interpret animal tracks, notice subtle shifts in the wind, or sense patterns in the movement of others. Every action, no matter how small, became part of a larger framework of learning. These lessons were reinforced daily, creating a culture in which instinctive knowledge and strategic awareness were inseparable. Adults acted as guides, demonstrating techniques in movement, gathering, and observation. Hunting was a school of patience, perception, and timing. Gathering taught attention to concealment, sustainability, and resource management. Movement through the forest was deliberate, each step reinforcing lessons in awareness and subtle influence. Even tasks that seemed mundane were part of a sophisticated system of environmental mastery, designed to ensure survival while cultivating strategic skill. Seasons structured both activity and philosophy. Winter demanded heightened caution, careful navigation, and reflection. Spring allowed for renewal, cautious exploration, and adaptation of strategies. Summer provided long periods for observation, experimentation, and skill refinement. Autumn became a time of reflection, consolidation, and preparation for the challenges of winter. These natural rhythms were internalized, forming a cyclical structure that guided both practical action and philosophical understanding. Rituals intertwined with these patterns. Morning exercises emphasized observation, silence, and awareness. Midday activities developed skill, timing, and discretion. Evenings featured storytelling, where lessons were embedded in narrative, ensuring knowledge passed effortlessly from generation to generation. Myths and legends, often misinterpreted by outsiders as superstition, encoded practical wisdom, environmental mastery, and social strategy. Through repetition and participation, children absorbed these lessons instinctively, reinforcing both survival and cultural cohesion. Social structure reinforced strategy and resilience. Leadership was earned through wisdom and demonstrated judgment, not through strength. Every member had a role, and cohesion was paramount. Mistakes were analyzed collectively, lessons were refined, and strategies were adjusted. Trust and discipline enabled coordinated action, ensuring that the tribe could respond effectively to environmental challenges or human threats. Collective intelligence, rather than individual heroism, became the foundation of survival. The tribe's understanding of human behavior was as refined as their environmental mastery. Outsiders, traders, explorers, armies were carefully observed. Patterns of pride, fear, curiosity, and impatience were studied and, when necessary, subtly influenced. Trails, rivers, and forests could be manipulated to guide perception or misdirect movement. Outsiders often felt unease, frustration, or misdirection, never understanding the intelligence shaping their experience. In this way, the tribe maintained autonomy and safety without confrontation. Conflict, when unavoidable, was precise and minimal. The supply lines could be disrupted, leaders misled, and areas rendered temporarily inaccessible. Interventions were calculated to achieve objectives efficiently while minimizing exposure. Even these actions served as lessons for younger members, reinforcing the philosophy of strategic subtlety, patience, and careful observation. Over time, these principles became second nature, embedded in every action, decision, and interaction. Even as empires rose and technology advanced, the tribe adapted quietly. They monitored changes in human movement, technology, and settlement patterns, adjusting strategies while maintaining their core principles. Visibility was controlled, influence was exerted subtly, and the landscape was managed to support both safety and guidance. Traders were guided unknowingly, explorers misled, and armies frustrated. Outsiders attributed failures to misfortune or superstition, unaware of the deliberate intelligence behind every outcome. Knowledge was curated and passed down through demonstration, participation, and ritual. Mistakes were analyzed collectively, and refinements were incorporated into future strategies. Observation, patience, and subtle intervention were internalized, creating a cumulative wisdom that persisted across centuries. Each generation added insight and adaptation, ensuring continuity and resilience. The tribe's victories were quiet yet profound. Paths misdirected, expeditions frustrated, and settlements abandoned all reflected the tribe's invisible influence. Knowledge, instinct, and subtle guidance shaped human behavior and preserved autonomy. Outsiders rarely recognized these achievements, yet the cumulative effect ensured survival, independence, and control over their environment. Modern landscapes retain echoes of this mastery. Forests, rivers, marshes, and hidden valleys carry subtle guidance and warnings. Travelers who observe carefully may detect shifted branches, altered streams, or paths designed to mislead. These are remnants of centuries of strategic intervention and environmental awareness. The land itself is a living record of the tribe's philosophy, blending practical mastery with cultural and spiritual insight. The ultimate lesson of the tribe's story is that endurance, patience, and subtle influence can surpass brute strength. Power need not be visible to be effective. Influence can shape outcomes quietly, yet decisively. Strategic subtlety, grounded in observation and harmonized with the environment, ensures survival, autonomy, and long-term impact. The tribe's legacy demonstrates that intelligence, restraint, and foresight are more enduring than conquest or domination. Every ritual, story, and daily action reinforced this philosophy. Observation became instinctive, patience a guiding principle, and strategic subtlety a habit. Through centuries of careful practice, adaptation, and teaching, the tribe ensured that knowledge, wisdom, and autonomy were preserved. Their victories, though invisible to most, were cumulative and lasting, influencing human behavior, shaping the environment, and maintaining continuity across centuries. The tribe's legacy is a testament to invisible mastery. By understanding nature and human behavior, they achieved survival, autonomy, and subtle influence without relying on force. This story teaches that enduring power is rooted in observation, patience, and knowledge passed through generations. Their philosophy remains relevant, reminding us that careful, deliberate action, combined with deep understanding, can achieve outcomes far beyond what brute force alone can accomplish. Even today, subtle echoes of their presence linger in forests, rivers, and hidden valleys. Travelers may sense patterns, guidance, or misdirection, reminders of a people who mastered survival through intelligence, restraint, and harmony with nature. These subtle imprints are evidence of centuries of accumulated wisdom, demonstrating that the quiet, patient, and observant can outlast armies, empires, and the passage of time itself. The tribe's ultimate achievement was not conquest, but continuity. They survived, adapted, and influenced their surroundings in ways both subtle and profound. Every action, story, and ritual reinforced their philosophy, creating a culture where knowledge, observation, and strategic subtlety became instinctive. Their story is a lesson in enduring wisdom, demonstrating that survival and influence are achieved through patience, careful observation, and alignment with both human and natural patterns. Through centuries of quiet mastery, the tribe preserved life, autonomy, and influence. The land, culture, and knowledge they cultivated carry a legacy that endures, offering timeless lessons in strategy, patience, and subtle power. Their story shows that true strength is measured not by force or visibility, but by the ability to understand, anticipate, and guide outcomes through intelligence, restraint, and profound awareness. In this way, the tribe's story comes full circle, a people whose quiet observation, strategic subtlety, and harmony with nature allowed them to survive, influence, and leave a lasting legacy. Their victories were invisible yet undeniable, their philosophy timeless, and their presence in the landscape an enduring reminder that the patient, the observant, and the wise can shape history without ever needing to be seen. And so, through forests, rivers, and hidden valleys, their story continues not in the pages of history books, but in the patterns of the land, the instincts of the observant, and the enduring philosophy of a tribe that mastered survival without ever seeking recognition. Their legacy, quiet yet profound, teaches that the greatest power often lies in patience, subtlety, and the understanding of both nature and human behavior, ensuring that their wisdom endures for generations to come.